Without objection, I'd like to approve the agenda by consensus for the investment committee meeting. If without objection, the agenda's been approved. Okay. Why don't we begin? I see 2, 4. I do believe we have a quorum present. So it brings us to item 5 on the agenda. But before we do that, we're going to have our speaker from Faster Cures at the Milken Institute speak with us today about the resources that are going in to address this global health crisis, the financial resources, as well as the human capital that is being spent around the globe trying to find a solution or a vaccine. And I don't want to botch your last name, Esther, so I'm going to refer to you as Esther. I had the opportunity to be on a call that the Institute hosted a few weeks ago, in which you participated. And I think you have some unique insights and visibility into the efforts that are being put in place to find a solution to this global health crisis that has now rippled and made its way through the economic fabric of the world. Chris, do you want to add anything before we turn it over to Esther?
Hey, Chris, just quick sec. Jonathan, I'm not seeing a feed on YouTube. Is that actually is that working? I've got a laptop beside me and I'm not seeing the YouTube feed.
Sometimes it will take some time for it to load up. So it could already have started and just hasn't gotten to you yet. You're ahead of the YouTube.
Wow. Okay. I don't hear that often. Okay. Thanks. It's still not on, but okay, as long as you can see it on YouTube.
And Esther, on behalf of CalSTRS, thank you for making time to be with us today, and of course for your patience as we were conducting some items in closed session that took longer than anticipated. So thank you on behalf of the board for your being here and for your patience. Christopher.
Thank you, Harry. And I echo those comments. Thank you, Esther, for being here. We felt that with so much information and misinformation coming out about the potential of a treatment for the virus and ultimately a vaccine, it would really be better to hear from a health expert of what's going on across the industry. As we said before, this is a health crisis, not a financial crisis. It's a health crisis that created a financial crisis. So we need to talk to somebody about really what's going on. What are some of those expectations on a timeline for scaling up the medical side? So Esther, please share your thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and certainly recognize the important business that you are taking care of as a board in your closed session. As you mentioned, we work at Faster Cures on medical research, and we bring that lens and perspective to this crisis. In our normal day-to-day jobs, we look at biomedical research and innovation. How do we accelerate the process? And so at a time like this, it's exactly the right kind of organization that should be very much involved with what are we doing relevant to the medical development of how we can really mitigate the most severe effects of this disease that we're seeing, this pandemic. I'm sure you all are following the numbers very, very closely of the cases that are confirmed both in the United States, but also all over the world, where we're seeing increasingly that the number of those who are diagnosed continues to rise, though it is coming down in certain places, like in New York. When we look across the US, on average, the curve is actually not necessarily bending. And that's due to the virus going into the middle of the country and different parts being affected at different rates. Globally, of course, we're seeing that same kind of trend as well. We developed a treatment and vaccine tracker to provide some clarity around as we are seeing the science evolve with who is more susceptible to the virus, particularly for getting the worst outcomes and severe illness, what can we do on a treatment side? What can we do on a vaccine side? The focus, of course, being on both. What we expect to see in the short term are more therapies that can address the virus and the illness on the treatment side. And that's really important as you see patients that are hospitalized in ICU on a ventilator. You've heard a lot in the media and elsewhere around the need for ventilators. That was the big crisis in March and April. Seeing that, of course, come down as hospitalizations are going down. But what can we do in a treatment setting so that those who are most severely ill are getting the right kinds of treatments to mitigate those outcomes, because it's going to take much longer for vaccines. So the tracker has provided some clarity around that. We've had dozens and dozens of conversations with everyone who's working along the entire medical research enterprise, from the National Institutes of Health to BARDA, the Biodefense Agency, to biotech, small biotech, large pharma, et cetera. So I'll just lay out some of the things that we see from a landscape perspective and then open it up for any questions that you might have. From a treatment perspective, we are tracking 203 potential treatments that can address this virus, that are compounds that have either been FDA approved for different indications, or there are those that have a good safety profile. They've been well studied for other indications, and therefore, because they're largely safe, we can study them very quickly for coronavirus. They largely fall into a few different categories. I'll start with antibodies. There are 57 categories of candidates that fall into the antibody track, and these are therapies that are either taking plasma from patients that have recovered and therefore have some antibodies in their body, and using that for patients that are ill, or creating synthetic versions of that. So, for example, some companies like Regeneron, for example, have actually been successful in cloning human antibodies in mice. And through their technology, they are going to extract that antibody from mice, those that have the most potent effects, and creating significant doses that could be used for humans. As you can imagine, of course, because of the nature of creating that kind of technology, this is not for wide use in the population. We're talking about thousands or millions of doses potentially, but not the billions that you will need to treat a world population. But there are a lot of efforts there. In fact, the American Red Cross has begun to ask donors who have recovered from COVID-19, they were diagnosed positive, they have since recovered, to donate their plasma, to come in and provide those samples. The New York State Health Department is using those samples both to treat patients, but also for these clinical studies that are underway with antibodies. There's a lot of progress and significant hope there. We expect to get data for some of these clinical studies this summer. The goal, of course, is to have doses available by the fall. And if those prove to be successful, more patients can be saved, and it will mitigate the effects of reopening the economy and potentially having a second wave in the fall. The next category are antivirals. We have 24 candidates that we're tracking in this category. You can think about antivirals very much like HIV medicines that stop the replication of the virus in the body. The most promising antiviral that we have seen is remdesivir, which was studied and put into clinical trials 1 month after we saw the virus in China. The NIH moved very quickly to start a clinical trial with remdesivir. Remdesivir is an IV infused medicine for hospitalized patients and severely ill patients that, again, are either on a ventilator or receiving high oxygen flow. The early data that we saw come out on April 29th shows that there is a 31% recovery time for patients who've received that treatment versus placebo. Before that, we saw earlier data that came out. But of course, that earlier data was from compassionate use. It was not a clinical controlled study. And so what we saw on April 29th was the first illustration of a clinically controlled study that gives us some hope that remdesivir could be useful. It's important to note that it helps with the time for recovery, which is quite important and quite critical, but it is not a cure. It helps, again, to make sure the patients are able to get out of the hospital faster. But what we need are not just one or two or even three therapies. We need a whole series and platform of therapies that could be interchangeably used depending on the patient that's being treated. There are other technologies like cell-based technologies, for example, RNA-based technologies. Those are earlier in the pipeline. Those are very much preclinical. It's good to watch, but our hope right now are on antibodies as well as even different formulations of remdesivir, an inhaled formulation potentially where you're not receiving it only by IV, but potentially you can inhale it just as you would have an asthma therapy. What we're also following with these studies is the clinical trials. So there are 81 of these compounds in preclinical trials. And what that means is that they're being studied in labs. They're being studied in animal. They have not yet gone into human for a coronavirus indication. We do, however, have 122 that are in clinical trials. And that's really good to see. We expect to see a lot more come into clinical trial by the end of the summer into the fall. We have a very strong treatment pipeline for COVID-19. On the vaccine side, we're tracking 123 vaccine candidates. We saw that Moderna, the first out of the gate, in not only getting a clinical trial underway, but even as we saw today, they have now moved into phase 2 of clinical trials. There are many different platforms and vectors being studied for a vaccine, whether DNA or RNA or an attenuated vaccine, essentially meaning it's the virus, but in a weakened form. Most timelines indicate 12 to 18 months before we see a vaccine that could be used widespread in the population. I would say that is highly ambitious. We have never had a vaccine developed in that timeline. One of the fastest was the Ebola vaccine that took 5 years to be developed. If you think about HIV, 30 plus years later, we still don't have an HIV vaccine. The scientists are very hopeful. There are a lot of efforts underway, great partnerships underway with large vaccine manufacturers, GSK, Sanofi, Pfizer, J&J, organizations that have deep expertise in the development of vaccines are all working on this. You may have seen the announcement by Pfizer and their partner BioNTech. They started their phase 1 trials in humans just the last few days. So a lot of efforts underway. And we expect to see even more of these vaccine candidates go into clinical trials by the end of the year. What's happening in accelerating that timeline, so typically it'll take 10 plus years to develop a vaccine. What is happening right now are that we're continuing to follow the right clinical trial process, scientific process, a phase 1 safety trial, followed by a phase 2 where you grow the patient population that are getting that dose, and then a phase 3 trial where you're talking not hundreds, but potentially thousands of patients. What's happening right now is these companies and tech and biotech companies are working very closely with the FDA to continue that process, but to compress the timelines. So, for example, we saw the Moderna vaccine that went into clinical trial in March, and in May, they now have approval to go into phase 2. That timeline, under typical circumstances, would be months, potentially, if not years. What that means, however, is we need to watch and follow the safety profile of these vaccines very closely over time, as well as efficacy for different populations. In addition, we have seen a lot of companies, large companies, as well as organizations like the Gates Foundation that have said, we will go at risk to ramp up manufacturing concurrently with clinical trial development. So we have a commitment that manufacturing of products in trials are already starting, that as soon as we have an FDA approved product, or even potentially very promising data come out of phase 2 trials, we may have emergency use authorization that says we can get this product out to the general public or to frontline workers while we wait for additional data to come through. And that's absolutely critical because vaccine manufacturing is a very complex process that takes quite a bit of time to certify the manufacturing sites, which are all over the world. And depending on the nature, whether you're a DNA or an RNA or an attenuated vaccine or with an adjuvant, there are a number of different scientific mechanisms. It can also delay the manufacturing, the very complex manufacturing process. Having that commitment to spur manufacturing concurrently with clinical trials, I will say, would be a very big game changer here. The other thing to note is that we have a lot of collaboration that is happening across both treatments and vaccines, unprecedented level of collaboration with both public and private institutions that we saw during the time, I would say, of HIV, though happening at a faster pace than we saw then. We're seeing collaboration within even the scientific academic research institutions, where institutions that typically will not share data or share investigators are doing so in real time in an accelerated way. The last comment I'll make before pausing for questions is testing, the question of testing, which I'm sure you all are dealing with as well. From a testing perspective, truly the gold standard continues to be PCR tests. These are the tests that are provided when you go to a healthcare institution where a healthcare worker with the appropriate PPE are able to take that nasal swab that's actually very deep into the nasal cavity in order to perform the PCR test, which is highly sensitive and can confirm with a high degree of accuracy that you have in fact you have in fact the virus and can give you a firm diagnosis. We've heard a lot around serology tests or antibody testing, which are tests that you can take to determine if you've had the virus and have sufficiently recovered, and therefore you've built up antibodies in your body to prevent you potentially from a second infection. The FDA in March issued policy that allowed serology test manufacturers to develop those tests without an FDA approval. What we saw was the marketplace was completely swamped with, right now, I measured about 180 different serology tests with no confirmation if they work or they don't work. FDA has now gone back to say we do need to institute a review process here. They're now approving with good degree of confidence those tests that are more accurate versus what has been marketed to the general public. So following very closely the FDA approval for the serology test is important to determine which could be helpful in giving us the right information. To note, on the scientific basis, we do not yet have the answer to the big question of if you've gotten the coronavirus and you even have antibodies in your body, will you not get a secondary infection? That question has not been answered. So while you may have a serology test that says you have antibodies in your system, we do not yet have data that demonstrates you cannot be infected in the future, which is what you really hope to see to give people what we call immunity passports, where you can freely go in the public and continue on about with your business. In that vein, the NIH has launched a study, which was announced a few weeks ago, where they will be testing on a population basis the number of people who might have gotten the virus but were asymptomatic. They're using serology tests for that. It provides helpful information to know the level of immunity within the population to determine whether we've hit herd immunity. Some of the results that have come back, not just from this test, from others in New York City, is that we're about 15% of the population has had the virus, where you need about 50 to 60% of the population to have herd immunity. So we were successful in social distancing, but what that means is that not as many people were exposed to the virus, we may not have that necessary herd immunity. Therefore, as we continue to open things up, there's a possibility for individuals to get the virus and to see infection rates continue to rise. So what do we need going forward? From our perspective, we need active surveillance. That includes testing that are in balance with reopening up different institutions and the economy. We need contact tracing so that you can identify where the hotspots are emerging and very quickly start to implement social distancing in those localities. And we continue to need the appropriate serology tests that can give us the right kinds of information. So I'll pause there. Hopefully that landscape was helpful, and take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Esther, for that clear, concise, and factual information about where we are and where we need to go. Joy, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there's any questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you, Harry. We do have one question from Betty Yee, the State Controller. Betty?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Harry and Joy. Thank you, Esther, very much for the overview. First of all, I think it's just really marvelous and really astonishing that there's just been this tremendous rally around just all of this work. And I do have to say, and I don't know if this is your take as well, but it seems to be a lot more cooperative as well in terms of just a lot of partnerships, and certainly looking at our institutions here in California coming together as well. I just had a question. Several days ago, or more recently, there's been coverage in the news about the coronavirus actually mutating into a more aggressive virus that could be more contagious and bring on a second wave that could be even more devastating. And so I was just wondering if these efforts that you've just described are kind of taking that into consideration, or is this going to be kind of an ongoing moving target?
Yes, I likewise have seen those reports as well, and the jury is out in terms of how infectious, differently so than now, what we might see in the fall could be. From a scientific perspective on the coronavirus, it does mutate, but what we're seeing in terms of the mutation, it's not mutating as quickly as you would see in other potential viruses. One of the big challenges with HIV is how quickly it does mutate, and which is really why we don't yet have a vaccine. So it is mutating, but not at the increased pace that will prevent us from continuing to target the various therapies that are in development and in the works. And so to, that second question of, are these efforts potentially going to not necessarily give us the right kinds of results because of a mutation with the virus, I would say that is being watched, that is being investigated. But right now there is high hopes that what is being investigated can very much still be effective, though we will see various strains potentially of this virus, but the level of mutation is not such that it may be ineffective.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Betty. Chris, you had a question or some comments?
Esther, thank you. My comments are about the vaccine. You said 12 to 18 months, and that was highly ambitious. One of our speakers posed concerns about this upcoming election in the fall. Is there any chance of a vaccine by the fall? I mean, I'm sure there's a chance, but should we just discount that's just short of a miracle?
Well, one, it would be an amazing feat to achieve a vaccine in the fall. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have never seen a vaccine even under 4 years, in the making. So what we're trying to achieve here has actually never scientifically been done before. So whatever the timeline, whether it's 9 months or whether it's 12 to 18 months, will be a huge effort. There are two places that I will point to where there are high hopes that a vaccine could be developed by the fall. There's an effort out of University of Oxford in the UK that have shown a high level of efficacy in animal with their vaccine. They are hoping to have a vaccine potentially be available by the fall. Vaccine efficacy in animal versus vaccine efficacy in human tend to be two different things. So I will say the jury is still out as we see them ramp up in human studies, which has actually happened. And we'll begin to get the data from that. The anticipate data being available early part of the summer. If that data proves to be positive, they're part of that group cohort where they're ramping up manufacturing. So they're closer, I would say, than others. That effort out of University of Oxford, it's funded by the UK government. It's also funded by CEPI, which is this Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, who all they do is vaccine development. So they're good people working on it. The second one I'll point you to is Pfizer's effort with BioNTech that started clinical trial. They are highly ambitious about the possibility of having vaccines available by the end of the calendar year. Again, also ramping up manufacturing. They're using a similar process as Moderna is using as an mRNA vaccine, which the manufacturing and development of that can happen much more quickly because of the platform that's being utilized. So it's hopeful. Moderna is also hopeful. There's a lot of hope until we start to see the data. And I think that's where we should pay close attention. We'll get a better sense of that as we come to the end of the summer, what the data starts to show for inhuman. And I will say what really matters is inhuman for a larger population. So you may see good safety data for 45 healthy adults or 100 healthy adults. It's when you scale it to the thousands that you will really start to see the efficacy and the safety proven out.
And one follow-up question: I don't understand the manufacture of a vaccine. You say that they're scaling up, but how long does it realistically take once one's discovered to create hundreds of millions of doses?
Well, typically a manufacturer will scale according to the phase of clinical trial. So if you're doing a phase 1 study with 100 healthy adults, you will typically have the dose supply in order to carry out the protocol for that study design. You get the data, you review that data with your investigators, with FDA. You then put in an application for your phase 2 trial. You create manufacturing capabilities in order to be able to execute that protocol, whether it's a few hundred or a few thousand patients, and then you continue on. Typically, you will not go at risk as a company to scale up millions of doses if there's no clear signal that you're going to get FDA approval. And so the timelines vary, of course, depending on how long are you following those patients in between those clinical trials before you ramp up manufacturing for your next phase. So seeing these developers with commitment from different funders to say that they're going to scale up before you even get data out of good phase 2 trials, that's quite unprecedented.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Gail.
Thank you, and I also appreciate you being here. In terms of the treatments you spoke about, whether it's the IV like remdesivir or some of the antivirals, so you made the point about HIV and 35 years later not having a vaccine, but the treatment is obviously has, I don't want to, I'm out of my lane in terms of expertise, but is there, how much hope is there in the treatments in terms of really being able to fully open up the economy and letting people kind of go about more of a, the new normal? Does that provide kind of the same level of hope in some ways as it did for AIDS and HIV? And how scalable are those products and in terms of manufacturing and the supply chains in terms of getting them all over?
Yeah, great questions. And you raise a very good point, which is exactly right, that despite not having a vaccine for HIV, because we have such good therapies on the market, antiviral therapies, for individuals that are compliant with their regimen, you can take before it used to be a cocktail, right? A really high toxic cocktail that individuals took, the AZT combo and others. Now you're down to a pill a day that you can take that can suppress your viral load and keep it undetectable as you're compliant with that medication, and keep it undetectable to the point where you may not even transmit that virus to another individual. In light of not having a cure for HIV, that in effect has allowed and created a lot of good course of treatment for patients that have it, and has saved millions and millions of lives. Similarly, here with the coronavirus, if you have an effective treatment that can mitigate those patients that have the virus getting severely ill, as you see the data, the vast majority of individuals either asymptomatic or have a very mild case of this illness. But for a subset of the population that we're learning increasingly more about, whether you have an underlying condition, whether you're elderly, we're seeing something interesting happening with children. We have to study that to see what exactly is happening there. There might be more severe cases. If you can mitigate those severe cases, you can prevent people from getting intubated. You can prevent people from having to go on ventilators or needing even more complex care in the hospital because you have a great treatment regimen. There, you may create the same level of confidence that we have that if you get HIV, there are good treatment options that are available to you. The risk is not zero, but it's certainly better than what we have today. Again, I do think that we will continue to learn a lot more as we see the data that come out of these antibody studies that are happening right now. There's a lot of hope for the plasma that is either a synthetic version or extracted from recovered patients. I worry about the scale. The scale will likely only allow those therapies to be available to either the frontline workers or to those who are severely ill. And potentially that might be all we need in a way at the moment, if others are prevented from getting more severe illnesses. But what it will not be necessarily is a prophylaxis, a preventative treatment, right? It's not something that you will take to prevent you from getting the virus. It will be available to you after you're already ill and potentially after you're already hospitalized. But if you give confidence to the population that there is something for you, if that were to happen, that creates a lot more confidence to go about in reopening our economy.
Thank you, Gail. There are no more board members in the queue, but Esther, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really fascinating overview, and I think it captures a lot of what many of us have been reading in the press. Just one question I have, I know we've talked about some of the either therapies or what the outlook is like for vaccines, but when you talked a little bit about what we need in terms of potential contact tracing, active surveillance. There also is a conversation around how we balance our response to the pandemic and managing it, and individual privacy and confidentiality. And that may be, outside of the specific work that Faster Cures is doing, but I just wondered if there were any comments you could share about that and where you see that discussion going.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do work on that in a different way when we talk about the role of big tech in healthcare, and there's already consumer mistrust, generally speaking, with the use of their health data. And then you layer on top of it, we're now in this pandemic environment. So that the questions about privacy continue to emerge. I will say what we are now trying to balance is the need for privacy, but yet being able to respond in an emergency situation where individuals may be more willing to have, potentially a little bit more exposure on the privacy side in order to mitigate, again, some of these things that we've talked about already. There are contact tracing applications that are very conscious of that and are providing information in a de-identified way But when you're trying to hone in on a hotspot and then localities, increasingly, you are going to, at some point, deal with real live individuals at the end of that whose data are being provided. So there's not a clear answer there in what that right balance is. It's certainly a trade-off. I think those trade-offs are being well managed by different technology applications that can de-identify individuals, but this is very much something that needs to happen at a local and state public health department, as they are really those at the front lines of managing where they see emerging clusters of the virus. And I think all of us are socially responsible and can determine our own risk tolerance for taking that app and sharing our data on that app that allows our local officials to be as effective as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be interesting to see how that discussion proceeds, because I think some of those issues are ones that people raise as we're also talking about how to reopen the economy, return to work, travel, get clearance to travel, things like that. Harry, we don't have anyone else in the queue. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Thanks everyone for your questions. And again, Esther, thank you for spending some of your day with us today. And I remember when Magic Johnson was made his announcement of his illness. It was a death sentence at the time. And it's people like yourself and organizations like Faster Cures and investors who invest in life sciences that go about saving in a race to save other people's lives. And that renews my hope in humanity. And I want to thank you because you've renewed my hope in humanity. The organization Faster Cures renews my hope in humanity. And at our last investment committee, when we met in person, we spoke about an investment that CalSTRS has made through a private equity relationship that we have into the life sciences in terms of trying to find some breakthroughs in cancer research.
He's going to say something really amazing.
We're right at the great place of cancer research, which of course the Milken Institute through the Prostate Cancer Foundation have invested in for many, many years, and have also turned the attention of that foundation to looking across the library what was effective in cancer that could be effective for this virus as well. So researchers are working certainly around the clock.
We missed your last minute or so, Harry. Sorry.
Well, no, it's just you. It's the investment in humanity. There are a lot of good people out there doing great work,
Yes.
and you're one of them, and so is Faster Cures. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Harry, that was 6A. Do you want me to go into 6B, or do you want to go back to number 5?
No. Here. Go to 6B.
Okay. That's the Chief Investment Officer's report. For the public's case, you can see within the report that the portfolio stood at $243 billion back on March 31, February 29th. That was before the market continued to decline, but now obviously as we're in April, we're back in a better position. What is probably surprising for many people is the portfolio is pretty close to where it started the fiscal year. So our return to date is pretty flat. If you look at a return on the chart going into February, we were actually up at a 10% return. We saw the portfolio obviously drop almost 20%, but then rebound 10%. So we're very much in a flat position as we have 2 months left to go in the fiscal year. We've heard from experts that this is certainly going to be a rocky road. I had shared with the board in closed session that the bull market that lasted 11 years was ended on late February. We're now in a bear market. Even though we have seen a strong rally in that bear market, we're still in a recession. And as we heard from Esther, we're still a long way for a solution to this health crisis. So the market rebound has been nice to see, but we are a tad more skeptical. The asset allocation remains fairly defensive, and we're going to continue to hold our cash position and be underweight global equity at least through the summer until we hear more information about the medical breakthroughs. We're at a point where obviously the challenge is with states opening up, whether we're going to see more infections. Clearly, the public is reaching its limit in terms of shelter at home, and you're starting to see pushbacks on that in many parts of the country. If we do see a resurgence of the virus in the fall, as is likely to be the case, I think there's going to be a risk about how much people in society are willing to go back to shelter in place. And that's going to be a challenge for governments in that cycle. When you look through the risk report, and I'll have part of the team mention that, one thing I wanted to highlight that's rather unusual on INV 34, we've actually seen the emergence of 2 emerging market stocks into our top 10. Our top 10 stocks are usually US based, but now we see Samsung, which has been there, a South Korean company, has been in the top 10 for a while. But Alibaba, the first Chinese company to show up in the top 10 of the global equity portfolio. And even though you can see on the preceding page, INV 33, that China is a very small part of our portfolio. It's a little about 1.33%. But some of the individual stocks in that have a very high capitalization. And it's a reflection of the fact that the market has been very concentrated in what I call shelter-in-place stocks. Alibaba obviously being the Amazon for China, but just in the USA, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Netflix, even Microsoft have all done extremely well in this environment. And I had shared with the board that those 5 stocks make up now almost 20% of the S&P 500 and about 17% of the Russell 3000. We've seen that kind of concentration in the past, but it usually doesn't stay. Historically, those companies come back down in value. Right now, they're priced to perfection because that's the services we're all using. And it'll really depend on how this economy opens up. For us at the staff level, the real challenge is they were able to stop the economy almost on a dime, but how do you restart it? And it's going to get back to a lot of individuals. I heard that movie theaters in Texas are going to open this weekend. How comfortable are people going back into movie theaters, going back into hair salons? And I think the real challenge, obviously, is going to be to the airline industry. When are people willing to go on airplanes? Now you're required to wear a mask the entire trip. I think it's going to be a while before we see, even if the shelter-at-home orders are lifted in some places, some people are going to be eager to get out of the house and go places. Other people are going to be more cautious. And so I think it's going to be a slower pace unwinding. I have heard anecdotally many times comments from people that they don't really want to go back to the office. They don't want to go back to work. They like staying at home and working from home. And so I think you're going to have a pushback from the public of a rush back. Clearly, there will be some industries where people want to get out and go to places. But I think we'll see more of a stumbling out in the recovery. And that's really the challenge for us at the staff, is trying to figure out with this rally in the equity market, and then what we're seeing in GDP numbers going into June and into the summertime. Where is the economy going to be? Are we going to continue to be in a recession? As Stephen McCourt said to us, recessions don't last days or weeks, they last quarters. The good news is bear markets generally don't last more than about 9 to 18 months. So this isn't a multi-year challenge, but we still think that the market is, we will consider it that we're in a bear market and likely to be in a trading range. I think that we have concerns about how we do during the summer, and then especially as we get into the fall, do we see a resurgence of the virus? How does that affect retail sales, consumer activity in the fall? And then even more importantly, how does it impact the U.S. election? because at some point the economy will turn ahead and start looking into the election and the uncertainty there of whether we're able to vote in person or whether it's mail-in voting. With that, I'll turn it over. Scott, do you want to add some information?
Oh, I was just going to say no. Thanks, Chris. I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I'd also like to bring in Geraldine and Josh to talk a little bit about the risk report.
Hello, Geraldine Jimenez, Director of Investment Strategy and Risk. I did want to highlight the risk report. Chris already just mentioned it, but we want to highlight a couple other areas. Particularly in these uncertain times, I think it is good to know that this team is up and running. They oversee the risk in the portfolio and not only provide the investment committee every meeting this report, we provide reports to internal senior leadership as we're making teams, as the RAC makes decisions. You've heard that name a lot, Risk Allocation Committee, as we're positioning the portfolio. And so risk is not just the risk of the volatility and the expected returns, which we do monitor. There's also counterparty risk we monitor, which is those we trade with, their quality, their ratings. We monitor the leverage in the portfolio, the total fund. And we also monitor the liquidity and do modeling on liquidity. As has been said a couple times, cash is king. I do want, though, to tell the board and all of the members that are listening, we have in IMB 38, page 38, we report every board meeting where it shows our ability to pay benefits. And so you should feel confident and comfortable. We monitor that. We are very comfortable in our ability to pay benefits. When we talk about liquidity, we now take it to the next level. How can we have extra liquidity to be optimal in the portfolio and to take advantage of good opportunities when they show up and to rebalance? So we've had a long-standing project since last summer. We actually got ahead of this, thinking about what do we want to do in this location. And so we're feeling comfortable. I don't want to be overconfident because you never should be with all the uncertainty out there, but we feel comfortable with our review and our consideration of them. So now I'm going to pass it over to Josh Gedish, who leads the risk team, and he's going to talk a little bit about more the volatility in the markets.
Great, thank you. So we have a chart that we put into this risk report for every meeting, and thankfully most of the time there's really not much to say about it. And so there's a chart on INV 36 that we call market turbulence. And I really like this chart because it takes some pretty complicated relationships and a lot of information and condenses it into one pretty simple visual. And the way that we interpret this is to get a sense of, is what we're seeing in the market normal or is it abnormal in terms of the moves we're seeing? Could be the size of the moves. So if the market's moving a lot, or things that should move together, are they moving together or not moving together? And so the simplest way to look at it is if you're below the red line that you see on that chart, you're in normal territory. If you go above that, you're abnormal. So markets are moving differently or they're moving a lot more than normal. And the farther you get away from that red line, the more abnormal it is. So if you look at chart 11 there, we've heard allusion to the unprecedented speed nature of the move we've seen in the market. This is sort of the visual evidence of that, if you will. It's, that scale, we saw moves, particularly in late March, that significantly exceeded the volatility we saw even in the great financial crisis. And a lot of that really was just the speed and magnitude of those moves. And so I think when we talk about it and we sort of felt it, but this is kind of taking everything that we see in the market, all sorts of different markets, equities, foreign currencies, interest rates, everything, and sort of condensing all of those moves into one single picture. And the bottom line of that was it was truly unprecedented by a significant margin. At the same time, given even with that volatility, thinking back to the AOM that we finished last year, so this chart sort of gives you the context of the market moves, but putting it in the context of what we expect out of the portfolio, long term, we would expect, given our capital market assumptions and the portfolio structure, that the portfolio would lose value about once every 4 years. And so if, being sort of flat now, I think is well within sort of the expectations, the types of things we would expect to see longer term in the portfolio. And I think, as we've alluded to, sort of is a good, even given the magnitude of the moves, it's a testament to the diversification of the portfolio and other things that we've done that it really is, basically flat now year to date. I think I'll just maybe pause and stop there. But I just think this is a pretty helpful visual.
Thank you, Josh and Geraldine and Chris. Why don't we go to questions at this point? Is that okay, Chris? Yeah. Joy, I'm going to turn it back to you for the questions.
Sure, no problem, Harry. First question is from Bill.
Thank you, Joy. I appreciate it. On that chart that you just referenced, chart 11, you've got the outlier distance. What is that? What are the elements that are composed in the outlier distance?
So we use that as sort of a term to measure. Maybe a way to think about it is if you expect the stock market day to day to move up or down 2%, and it moves 10%, you're pretty far away from that normal move. And essentially that distance is how far away are you from normal moves. So the higher that number, the farther away you are from what you would typically expect to see with respect to just the day-to-day volatility in the market. Is probably the simplest way I could think to sort of understand that number.
So, I mean, this past March, compared to the global financial crisis, we were twice as far away than at the highest point. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And Harry, I think the thing I'd add, from an investment staff perspective, after the 08-09 crisis, we talked a lot about the shape of the recovery. And we've already mentioned that a few times today. Is this a U-shaped recovery? Right now the stock market is showing you a V-shaped recovery that by the second quarter, or probably the third quarter starting in July, that will suddenly be all back to normal and everybody will be getting on airplanes. We've heard people say it'll be more of a U-shaped recovery where it'll have a flatter bottom, maybe through the summer before we get back into the fall. But then there's also the risk of it being more of an L-shaped recovery. And especially with Esther's comments about the timeline on a vaccine, I think that the markets aren't expecting it to be more drawn out. They're not expecting it to be a resurgence in the fall. And we've heard different scenarios and the risk that we may face. And right now the market is pricing in probably the absolute best scenario in a V-shaped recovery. As we've shared with you from staff perspective, we're skeptical of that. We are hoping for more of a U-shaped recovery, but since this is a medical crisis and the medicine for it is social distancing, it is uncertain how long this will take for the economy to return and human behavior. Will we easily, once restrictions are lifted, will we go back to our same level of behavior? Clearly, as Stephen McCourt pointed out, with the volume of people unemployed, companies are going to be slow to hire them back because they've had debt service during these last 2 months that they need to have a resurgence and pay that off. So if employment is slow, that's going to lead right into all those questions about retail sales. As I've said before, almost 70% of our GDP is made up of retail. And if people aren't able to have disposable income, then we're going to have a slower time coming out of this. So our expectation remains that it was easy to stop the economy, but it's going to be harder to restart it. Sputtering doesn't mean that it won't restart, but I think that's really going to lead into the questions about medical advancements and success. Otherwise, we do run the risk, as we've discussed, of a real negative outcome of a resurgence in the fall. The economy stays flat and in a bit of a recession. You'll have trouble within Europe and the North and South dynamic. You'll have trouble in the US versus China relationship. And that all, unfortunately, leads us right into the fall, into the November election, and questions about how you even hold an election if people are required to do social distancing. So on one hand, I have to say I can make a nightmare scenario that is something right out of a Hollywood movie. On the other hand, Wall Street is, thrilled and happy and everything is fine and we're going to be over this in no time. Or kind of a middle case where we're going to have to work our way through this. We can't give you a hard probability on any of those outcomes, but we know that we face them. And so we're going to maintain the diversification, the defensive stance in the portfolio. If this equity market rallies up to 3,000 on the S&P 500, then we will have missed out on that. But I think the volume of information at our fingertips tells us remain defensive and be cautious. We're not out of the woods yet. Harry, if you allow me, I'll open it up to Steve McCourt and Makita if they want to make some comments.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. I'll be brief because I think most of what this is Steve McCourt from Makita Investment Group. Most of what I would comment on echoes the comments that Chris and others have made so far. A few points I want to highlight. March was, as Josh highlighted in the risk report, a particularly unusual month in the market with a lot of illiquidity and a lot of extraordinarily volatile days. As we look at returns through the end of the month and sort of 7 or 8 weeks through the bear market, one important fact to note is that the relationship in returns across asset classes held pretty consistently with past experience. And by that, I mean, given the magnitude of the drawdown in the equity markets globally being down between 20 and 25% for the quarter, other asset classes behave the way you would model them to behave. And so the assumptions that we use in our asset allocation analysis and that CalSTRS uses to support its asset allocation policy bore out during this period so far anyway. Secondly, I want to highlight that the degree of policy support provided to the markets already has far exceeded that which was provided in 2008 and 9. Both in terms of the scale of the support from both the Federal Reserve and the federal government, in the scope of support across various economic actors, consumers and businesses. And certainly a large reason why the market has rebounded so significantly since the trough in March was a function of that policy support. Chris alluded to it already, but I do want to note that two things would cause us to believe that we're far from finished with the chaos, uncertainty, and risk associated with this market. The first being that recessions, when they occur, typically last for a matter of quarters, if not over a year. They don't last weeks or months. And reminding everybody from the experience in 2009, it took our economy 6 years to bring the unemployment rate back down to 5% from the peak of 11% we hit in the beginning of 2009. So job destruction tends to happen fairly quickly. Job creation tends to happen much, much more slowly. Also, market volatility, once elevated as it has been, tends to persist for a while. So I think we and your staff are aligned with the belief that we're likely to see more volatility before we're out of the woods on this. And the final thing I want to highlight is potentially the most lasting legacy of this period for pension fund investors may very well be the very low level of interest rates that have been created by the recession and central bank activity globally since the pandemic hit. As we've discussed in the past, low interest rates have a lot of implications on forward-looking returns across all asset classes. And so that's a particularly important financial metric that we would encourage the committee and staff to keep an eye on as we evolve through this period. And with that, maybe I'll hand it over to Alan Imkin to say a few words as well.
Mr. Chair, members, Alan Imkin, it's good to see everyone again. I would just like to underscore the commitment that your staff has made to continue the day-to-day job in an extraordinarily challenging environment, making sure that investment policy was complied with, that the assets were prudently, continually put to work, that there was adequate liquidity in the portfolio, and that all of that was managed remotely in an almost seamless manner. And the credit goes to Mr. Ehlman and Scott Chan and the whole investment team for not missing a step, taking advantage of opportunities that presented themselves, taking profits where they were created in the RMS portfolio and redeploying those assets at better prices in the equity market. There really is no precedent for what they've accomplished, and I just want to commend them for that activity. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you, Alan. I don't know if there was anything else from staff or Chris, was there anyone else that we wanted to pull in onto this portion?
No, Harry, that's it. Really just to help the public understand the portfolio is stable. We're actually really close to where we started the fiscal year at this point. So we're very flat on the year. To June 30, we have 2 months to go. So we'll have to see how we trade for the rest of this time period. But the diversification that the board put into place, the creation of RMS as an asset class has added value during this time period when equities have been so weak. And we will have to see where we close out at June 30 to be able to determine how we do on the year. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I don't see any hands up, so why don't we proceed directly to Ms. Smith.
Thanks, Harry. I want to leave out
Chris.
Yes.
Chris, it's Joy. I'm sorry to interrupt. Harry, but I know we're, the next item was to recognize Debra. I just wanted to flag, there was a work plan, the agenda item 5. I didn't know if you wanted to cover that before we move into Debra.
That's probably a good idea. Thank you, Joy. Great idea. So we're going to go back to item 5, which is the work plan. And as a point of reference, each year the investment committee identifies a priority for the staff. I had an opportunity to speak with Chris and other members of the team and ask them whether or not they thought it was prudent and wise to put something on the work plan given their focus and where we know the majority of their time needs to be in terms of managing the portfolio itself. That in and of itself is a full-time job. We embarked on a 2-year work plan to look at the transition to a low-carbon economy, and that work will continue into the 2021 year and beyond. That will continue to be a focus. So that's a carryover into as a 2-year plan. After speaking with others, we believe that the adoption of a work plan, one topic for the second half of 2021, which is really the study of Asia. It's on INV 20, and then INV 21 speaks to what the recommendation is. So I'll turn it back over to Chris at this point.
Thanks, Harry. As you said, we're not done with the low carbon future study. We got part of the way done, but we still want to continue to work with the committee on addressing how do we want to tilt the portfolio, how do we want to look at companies about their ability to frankly be flexible and to adjust, as well as whether we want to put dedicated parts of the portfolio and maybe even tilt some of the indexes to anticipate a low carbon future. I've mentioned in the past, you have an investment belief that you believe the markets are highly efficient, mostly highly efficient. This would be a question because now we have an investment belief about climate risk. Do we think that the markets are properly addressing the risk of climate change and the potential regulatory impacts of that, and whether we're willing to tilt some of our portfolios in anticipation? It would be a recognition of some level of active management, but it wouldn't necessarily violate your view that markets are largely efficient. We don't say they're completely efficient. The second topic is another area that I've been mentioning in our offsite discussions a couple of times, which is really Asia and the high growth areas, particularly obviously China, which is very politically sensitive right now. I've always kind of put it very simply as whether China is a friend or a foe. It's not that clear cut, and they're probably both, and they will probably continue to be both. Are they a competitor? Are they a partner? Or are they an adversary? And they are all one. And as we've heard, it's probably going to continue to be difficult. But I think it's an area, it's in our portfolio. It's part of the global indexes. It's really something that we need to do a bit of a deeper dive. Karen Yamamoto challenged me with the question of, what are the goals of these studies for you? Well, that's really up to you and what you want to do with each of these studies. But I think in this one in particular, it would be difficult to ask you to make a hard policy on Asia. But I think what we can come to is, given the ESG risks in that part of the world, the fact that it's a different political system, different accounting rules, what are some of the due diligence steps, some of the extra criteria you'd like to see staff do on investment opportunities in that region to help protect fund? And how do we look at that long term? In many of the investments, they're going to have a high growth because of the population and the demographics. But rule of law is different, political system is different. And so how do we look at that? And obviously the US's relationship with other partners around the world changes over time. So I think it would be fascinating. Hopefully we'll able to get it done in the springtime of 2021. Obviously depends on how we're able to hold meetings, but I think we have several very exciting guest speakers lined up that are experts in this area that really can present kind of a true global and long-term perspective on Asia and the growth of Asia.
Thanks, Chris. So we'll open up to any questions or comments. There is a recommendation on INV 21 for your reference.
Harry, so there aren't any board members seeking to speak. I think I would just, lend my support to the plans. And I think all of us know throughout our conversation, we've talked about how much uncertainty we have with what the future holds. We know how to pivot. We know how to be resilient and focus on things differently if we were to need to.
Sure. So we'd be entertaining a motion then if we could have someone make a motion to this agreement.
It's Joy. I'll move approval.
It's been moved by Joy Higa, seconded by Controller He, to approve the recommendation on INV 21 relative to the work plan and the accompanying work plan for the upcoming fiscal year on INV 22 and 23. Any discussion?
Lamont, do we have to do a roll call on that? Or?
Yes, we should do a roll call vote.
Okay. That's what I figured. I was like,
okay. Sure. So Lamont King, Senior Counsel, here to take the roll on the motion to adopt the fiscal year 2020-2021 work plan. Controller Yi.
Aye.
Mr. Yamanaka.
Aye.
Mr. Prezant.
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto,
Aye.
Ms. Bradford,
Aye.
Ms. Hendricks. Ms. Hendricks, did I hear you? Oh,
You're muted.
Sorry. Yes. Now I got it.
Thank you. Ms. Higa,
Yes.
Mr. Seha,
Aye.
Ms. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Keeley, motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. King.
You're welcome.
Brings us back to item 6C, as in Charlie. This is the recognition of our outgoing Chief Operating Investment Officer, Debra Smith. I've been on the board quite a while. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Harry. And thanks, Jonathan, for bringing up that lovely picture. I'm really glad that we're able to take a moment today to recognize and honor Debra. She is announcing her upcoming retirement. As I have told the board, I am pleased to say that after taking some time off in May, Debra will rejoin us as a retired annuitant to help us work through the summer, through this transition till we're back, hopefully at some point into the office. So I really thank her for adjusting her personal and family plans to do that. Debra has over 40 years of experience in the financial services industry. And as you can tell by the picture, she started at about the age of 10. Debra has about 24 years of experience with the state, specifically with CalSTRS. She started her tenure at STRS in 1996 as a member of the audits branch, and 2 years later joined and transitioned over to the investment branch as an associate investment officer. That's a title we don't even use anymore. Debra quickly climbed the ranks to investment officer 3. In 2010, she was selected as the director of investment operations. And then I'm pleased to say in 2014, she was hired to be our first chief operating investment officer, our first COIO, reporting directly to me and part of the senior staff and senior leadership. Debra has had some incredible contributions to the investment branch. She's been part of the executive staff on Jack's team. She's represented the branch and the board's strategic plan, the enterprise risk management. As part of her duties as COIO, she oversees investment operations. She has created our investment compliance and performance unit, and she oversees the administration unit within the branch. I think when I look back, probably most proud of Debra's accomplishments, really, as Harry mentioned, was pioneering and helping put together our investment cost report. Alan Emkin has mentioned that is industry leading as one of the most comprehensive cost reports in the industry. I got to give credit to Paul Rosensteel. Paul, former board member, was the one that pushed us pretty hard to put that report together. And I'm pleased to now say it's a report that we use pretty extensively across the investment branch. And you guys have found incredibly valuable. So thank you, Debra, for helping spearhead that effort to put that whole thing together. It is a major undertaking. In 2016, Debra was appointed to the Public Committee Accounting's Oversight Board. It's a long word, but the PCAOB, Standing Advisory Committee. She represented institutional investors. That's a group that meets in Washington. That's a subset of the SEC and is really important. Also in 2016, and I know she was really proud of this, Debra received the Leadership in Business Award from the Sacramento chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. Debra's been a powerful mentor and leader to so many people in the branch and even to CalSTRS and to the community. She's made her spirit, her integrity, and her accuracy known to so many people. I always told Debra that she is ideal in the role of the COIO because of her attention to detail and attention to accuracy. I've been honored to work with Debra for 19 years that I've been at CalSTRS. Tremendous number of accomplishments. I personally have been very blessed by her presence. So Debra, on behalf of the investment staff, I want to thank you for all your hard work, your tremendous leadership, and especially your mentorship to so many people on staff. You know, and we know that you will continue to be a super success in the next part of your career. And if I can ask Scott Chan and a few of the staff that work for Debra, board, if you'll allow us, that we'd like to make a few comments. So Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think, Debra, you know that when you announced your retirement, we've had an ongoing joke because the market's just fallen apart right after that. So is it COVID? Is it because of your retirement? I mean, I think it's actually a pretty close call here. I wanted to say that for me, 4 words describe you, Debra. And I'm just going to start with the first 3: grace, poise, and professionalism. So just starting with grace, you texted me about 2 weeks ago, and you wanted to provide reflections for what was on your heart. And what that manifested into is just one of the best meetings I've had here at CalSTRS. You went around the room and had a positive reflection for all of the directors. It was such a powerful meeting. And to me, that's grace. You know, as for poise and professionalism, let's just put it this way. This is your last board meeting, and I think that you're just as prepared for your last one as you were for your first one. And I think that what people don't see, but I see, is that you are actually prepared for every single meeting. And what dedication. My last word, and this is the best word, is mentoring. Mentoring is your passion. And I think that you have set an example and been an inspiration to me and to a lot of the junior staff. You've mentored a lot of our staff. And so you're part of this culture. I think that's going to continue to live on. And as Chris was saying, you're going to be wildly successful in that next endeavor, which pursuing your passion of mentoring other professionals. So I'm going to end with this. I will cook for you. And not even a pandemic is going to save you from my cooking. We're taking a rain check on the retirement party, and I'm going to miss you. Thank you.
Jack, can I ask you to make a few comments about Debra and her leadership?
Absolutely. I could make a lot of comments about Debra, and I bet you never imagined your goodbye via Zoom. This is an amazing experience to do it like this. But what I would add with Scott's comment, Debra, is clearly you, even though there's a lot of training and thought that goes into being an executive, unfortunately, it's always hard to have the big picture and the vision in that role because you want to advocate for your branch, advocate for your resources, and everybody understands that piece of managing. But for you did that so well, but then you also did the other piece, which was advocate for the organization. So as Chris said, he's thanking you on behalf of the branch. I also want to thank you on behalf of all 1,200 CalSTRS employees because they all benefited from your contributions because you helped shape the organization's success these last years on the executive staff. And you've been a good friend and a great executive as part of our organization. And I wish you the best in retirement. Take care.
Harry, I'd like to call on 3 of the staff people that work directly for Debra, all 3 ladies, all 3 minorities. Let's start off with April Wilcox.
Hi. So I first met Debra at a Taekwondo studio doing kickboxing. And let me tell you, she can hold her own. She was focused and determined, the same qualities I saw in her when we started working together at CalSTRS, which was completely coincidental, by the way. The same theme that others have been saying, Debra has been instrumental in shaping my career. She really is a true mentor. For 15 years here, she has guided me, challenged me, and pushed me. And she always gave me an opportunity to succeed. And what I mean by that is, if there was a chance to meet someone important, she would invite me to join her. If there was opportunity to present, she would ask me to do it and show up to support me. She always had my back. Like Jack said, she fought hard for her staff. And she taught me one of the most important rules, as some of you know about, is the 24-hour rule. And so that's, if you don't know it, if you're emotionally affected by something, wait 24 hours before you respond. And I can't tell you how much that rule has helped me in not only my career, but my personal life. I am just one example of Debra's passion to mentor and lift up women. She devotes a lot of her time to diversity and inclusion and the importance of maintaining the strong culture we have here at CalSTRS. So, Debra, you're going to be missed, and I wish you success in your future endeavors. I know you will continue to do great things.
If I can call on Muriel. There you go.
There I am. There are so many things that I could say about Debra. She has not only been an amazing boss, but she's been a fabulous mentor to me since I have been able to work with her. There have been many conversations that we have had, no tears, that we have had that she has walked me through, both professionally and personally. I have been amazed by her strength in leadership, not only as just someone who's just intelligent and passionate, but someone who is passionate when it comes to specifically people of color and women of color in business. And it has caused me not only to, our conversations have caused me not only to gain more passion in what I do, but it has caused me to, like a light bulb to come on as far as how I would like to live out my passion. And so I just want to thank you, Debra, for all that you have done, all that you have shown us, all that you have taught us, and you'll definitely be greatly missed.
Thank you, Muriel. I'm crying myself. Shafat Hassan.
Hi, Debra. I think your retirement still feels very surreal to me because as Scott mentioned, that ever since you announced your retirement, everything around me has been surreal at a global level. The pandemic, the lockdown, markets, so on and so forth. I'm not going to say a lot today because this is not easy for me, and it's not going to be goodbye, so I'll keep it short. I have learned so much from you in the past 3 years. You've hired me from the financial services branch, and the value you've added to my career by being a leader and not much of a boss, but really being a leader with your guidance is truly priceless to me. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. You're a great mentor, like I think we've heard that many times today, and I think that can be repeated enough times. You have guided me and you have challenged me to be better at everything that I do. I'm truly inspired by your passion for diversity and inclusion. And when I really think about it, I don't think I'll terribly miss you after your departure because I'm going to carry those values, those inspirations that you have instilled in me and feel your presence all the time. And thank you very much, Debra, for everything. The entire investment performance and compliance team will miss you, and we wish you all the best in your next adventure.
Thank you, Shabbat. I know we had a lot of speakers, but there were people who are very impassioned by Debra and really wanted to talk. It's amazing to say, but there are 3 people on the investment staff that were here with Debra for all 22 years. Instead of all 3, I asked one, though, to pick one, which is Stephen Tong, to make some comments about Debra.
Thank you, Chris. Debra, I think it's a privilege for me just to speak to you. And I think I feel sadness, but also happiness for you. And like Chris has said, I've known you for the entire time you've been in investment office, and it's been a real privilege to get to know you. Before I begin to share my thoughts, I just want to share with you a quote from John Wooden. And just by the way of background, he's was UCLA head coach back in the late 1940s through 1975. And over the years, when I look for leadership, I've read a lot of his materials. But I want to share with you just a quote that he had, and I think it encapsulates who you are. And this is the word success. And how he defines success is it's coming to know that you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. I think that really speaks a lot about you. And when I think about great leaderships, there's really two things that come to mind. And one is exercising the gifts that you were given from God. And the second thing is investing your time in other people. And you have done both of those things. So these are my thoughts. And there are very few people who have inspired me. And Debra, you have been one of those individuals. You are an excellent leader and have served the California public teachers for the 24 years that you've been at CalSTRS and the last 5 years as Chief Operating Investment Officer. And as one speaking for the entire office, we really appreciate just your leadership and how you really, we see just your contribution to the office operations. Debra, you're very confident and also display great humility. It's one of the aspects I really appreciate about you. You're a very caring and selfless person. And you know, leadership is just not about yourself. It's about individuals you work with and the success that you share with their endeavors. Your selflessness has taught me a lot about sacrifice. I know that you as a leader, you're also a positive role model, as others had mentioned. Debra, you always made yourself accessible to others, including myself. I know that on many occasions we have private conversations, and so I appreciate each one of those moments that we had. But I really appreciate, one thing I appreciate about you is that you understand that great leadership is just not focused on you, but it's focused on others. And that's a lesson that I apply today as I learn to lead. Debra, we will miss you. I appreciate you as a friend and as a colleague, and I want to wish you well in your next endeavors.
Joy, I'll turn it back over to you. I see your hands raised.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, did you have any other members of the staff that wanted to make some comments?
Other than Debra at the end,
okay.
I want to give her a chance to say goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Well, I actually realized I made a critical error in going after your staff instead of before, because their remarks are hard to top. But I think, I will keep mine really brief because I think the words that everybody shared have captured a lot of what I wanted to say about Debra. Debra, I think I would just say, I want to say thank you for everything that you've done in your career at CalSTRS. In the time that I've been on the board, there's a lot that we've done that I'm extremely proud of. But one of the things I'm most proud of, I think, and reflect on is our commitment to inclusion and diversity. And it's not just the commitment that we have to inclusion and diversity when we look out, but it's also when we look in. And the fact that we model that when you look at our board, when I look at the faces on the screen in front of me, when I look at our executive team, when I look at Chris and you, Debra, and our investment team, when I look at all of our staff, we represent not just what diversity looks like, but what diversity and inclusion can help an organization achieve. And we've heard a lot of people talk about the big role that you've played in doing that. I know you've been recognized by others for all your accomplishments there. You've clearly had a role, not just on a policy level, but also doing it individually with the mentoring and coaching that you've done. I have really enjoyed getting to know you in the time that I've been on the board, as a colleague, as a leader, as a woman leader, and as a working mother, because doing that juggle is something that I think working mothers are often the only ones who understand. So I just want to say thank you. wish you the best in your next chapter. Although I'm glad that your next chapter, I think, will continue to involve CalSTRS. So we're lucky to be a part of that. But thank you.
Debra, do you want to make some comments?
Before she goes there, Debra?
Yes.
I want to thank you for all that you've done for CalSTRS, for our members. There are very few people who can, capture my attention on such a wide range of topics, like risk reports and cost reports and all the issues that you oversee in terms of making sure we're in compliance, and then pivot and ask me if I've been to what am I doing with my daughters. And I have a lot of respect for anyone that has that type of ability to have a range of conversations that are truly important and meaningful. And I'll always have fond memories of when we were in New York. Seems like a long time ago. Seems like a lifetime ago. It was cold. It was December. We were going to an event at the library, the Schwartzman Library. And you had asked me if I knew how to get from where we were on 41st and 7th or something, and could I help you? And I think Geraldine was with us, and June may have been with us as well. And I thought, wow, I can be useful. I can walk them across and get them to the Schwartzman Library on a cold, windy New York December evening. And it's those types of interactions that, for me, are really valuable. Because at the end of the day, an organization is only as good as the people in it. And you're a great human being, and you've served us for the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Joy. Chris Ailman, I was here before you started, and I knew that you were going to be a great CIO for us. Personal and professional, you stretched me, and I thank you for that. Scott, haven't worked with you as long as Chris, but I am looking forward to tasting all the food that you post on your Zoom pictures. Jack, I want to thank you and Cassandra for encouraging me to take the executive development program. That was instrumental in my career. Thank all the executive staff. I thank all the investment branch staff. We have a great team. We are a family. And like family, we get along and sometimes we don't. But we use that 24-hour rule and we come together and we're able to manage this portfolio. Thank you, April. Thank you, Shafat. Thank you, Mariel. Stephen Tong, you were here when I started, and you're still here, and you're just a great friend, and I've got to know your family as well. So thank you so much to everybody. I've had a very rewarding career here at CalSTRS. I love working with people. I love helping people, especially teachers. And it was, Chris said it, the COIO position was made for me. I love my position. I love my job. So I will be here in a different capacity through the summertime. And one thing I know about the investment branch and one thing I know about CalSTRS is we know our mission, we know our members, we know our families, and we work very hard to accomplish those goals and objectives, and they will continue to do that as a team. A quote that I just wanted to leave you that just kind of sums up is Maya Angelou quote. My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some humor, some compassion, some passion, and some style. So I want everybody to keep calm, stay classy, stay healthy, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Debra. Chris, this brings us to the review of information requests. I don't believe we have any requests for information. If we did, ask Lamont to let me know. Okay, we don't. Item 8 is a draft agenda for the next committee meeting. It's, I would say, more likely than not that in July we'll be meeting remotely as well. And you can review what the draft, and it may or may not be modified between now and then, depending on what may occur. So it's there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else there, Chris?
No, I would just highlight, obviously we pushed a lot of the important work from this meeting, not knowing how virtual meetings work, off to July, and it may obviously be as well virtual, but we do have one guest speaker, so we'll time that properly, and then we do have some important details to get through, and as I mentioned, we'll bring you the investment policy because I think we'll be ready to move to step 1 on the asset allocation long-term plan. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I don't see any hands from members of the committee. Clearly, Sharon and I will be speaking with Jack in terms of pacing and timing and our ability to stay focused, and we'll learn some lessons from this, and we'll make some changes between now and July around timing and pacing. So I just received a message that we have members of the public that are here to address the board. There are 3 members, I believe, of the public that wanted to speak to item 5. So they'll have 3 minutes each. And then we'll hear from members of the public for items that do not appear on the agenda. And that will all be facilitated by our staff with a maximum of 30 minutes for non-agendized items of no more than 3 minutes each. So with that, we'll go to public comments for item 5, which is my understanding there's 3 members of the public, 3 minutes each.
Hi, Harry. We have actually just 2 members of the public for item 5 now, and I'm going to bring in our first caller. Her name is Paula.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi, I'm Paula Buell. I'm a retired teacher and a CalSTRS member. I want to commend CalSTRS and the board for the focus on a low carbon future in the work plan. I understand that the presenters at the October 2019 offsite made a strong case for a transition away from carbon producing industries. So you already know global warming caused by carbon pollution is wreaking havoc with our environment, human life, and the economy worldwide. When I last spoke to the board, I mentioned the danger of holding onto oil and gas until it becomes worthless. We're seeing the weakness of the fossil fuel industry now in real time as the economy reacts to the COVID-19 crisis. I urge you to create a divestment plan and act on it immediately. Any delay will only increase the damage to our pensions. The global pandemic should be a wake-up call for the changes yet to come, as climate change will also cause disruption to and opportunities for our economy. The work plan can and should focus on creating a roadmap for fossil fuel divestment and guiding CalSTRS to invest in a green, just, and sustainable economy. Our pension money can be used to support development of alternatives such as carbon sequestration, advanced batteries, and clean energy. And maybe there will be even opportunities in Asian markets for those kinds of investments. That's what we, current teachers, retired teachers, students, parents, community members, and taxpayers want for our pension funds. CalSTRS' position as a large and highly regarded pension fund places you in an excellent position to lead the transition to a just, fossil-free economy. Thank you.
Brian, I believe we're ready for the next speaker.
Your next caller is Vanessa. Vanessa, go ahead. You're on the line.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Warheit. I'm the Executive Director of Fossil Free California, and my mother, who lives with me, is a CalSTRS retiree. I was at the October offsite, which began this year's study of a low-carbon future, and I'm delighted to hear that you're continuing this work. But I'm also concerned that you're operating on a timetable that denies science and that you're continuing to bleed CalSTRS members' precious savings into the dying tar sands and fracking industries in particular. For the benefit of any teachers listening today or later on watching on YouTube, I just want to point out that over the past year, CalSTRS has lost over $1 billion of your retirement savings on investments in fracking and tar sands alone. And that number, incidentally, does not reflect losses from the day when oil was trading at negative $37 a barrel. These numbers come from the equities in CalSTRS passive portfolio. And we understand that the passive portfolio gets the lion's share of the fund because data shows that markets do better ultimately than individuals in terms of performance. And trying to pick winners and losers is in the long term usually a losing bet. But as Chris Ailman just pointed out, sometimes markets aren't quite as wise because they have significant blind spots. And I just want to mention the S&P is not the only market index out there. There are tons of data now to show that fossil-free indices are increasingly outperforming the market. Even more data shows that there are plenty of fossil-free indices that you could be following instead. And if you really wanted to, there are plenty of ways you could just hug the S&P returns with a fossil-free portfolio. Though on behalf of my mother and all the teachers of our great state, I'd really prefer it if you outperformed that benchmark at the moment. So I'm here to ask you, please shift CalSTRS index to one that excludes an industry in secular decline that is poisoning our communities and threatening the future of our students. At that October site, Alicia Steiger spoke plainly. She told you climate has canceled business as usual, and to invest as usual is to take a bet against physics. So we need you to stop betting against physics and shift our money now to investments that build a safe green recovery and start earning our hardworking teachers a decent return. And lastly, I'm just confused by the proviso that the work will last until January of 21 if the committee can return to traditional in-person meetings. What if they can't? Does that mean you're going to kick the can even farther down the road? We know these are difficult times, but teachers have been able to rise to the challenge, radically restructuring how they teach, and we expect no less of CalSTRS. So please prioritize and accelerate this deadline to address the urgency of the climate crisis only being compounded by the COVID epidemic and divest now from fossil fuels. We're counting on you. Thank you.
Brian, does that conclude public comments for item 5?
That concludes public comment for item 5, correct. And we have our next caller. Her name is Diana.
Thanks, Brian. How many callers do we have on this item, Brian?
We have 7 callers, including Diana.
Okay, thank you. It's 3 minutes each. Thank you, Brian.
Hello, I'm Diana. I'm a retired teacher and a member of CalSTRS. At this time, oil markets are demonstrating true riskiness as an investment, and oil company executives and their allies in the White House are clearly colluding to prop up their dying industry. One of those executives, Lee Raymond, the former CEO of ExxonMobil and its predecessor, Exxon, is up for re-election to the board of JP Morgan Chase. CalSTRS now has a powerful opportunity to truly make a difference using your strategy of engagement to support ESG policy. And in reference to the current crisis, the COVID crisis, we know that populations suffering from the toxic effects of fossil fuels are at higher risk for the worst effects of COVID-19. CalPERS and CalSTRS are the third and fourth largest pension fund share owners of Chase. JP Morgan Chase is the largest funder of the fossil fuel industry, pouring more than $296 billion into fossil fuels since the 2015 Paris Agreement. Lee Raymond has been lead independent director of JP Morgan Chase since 2001. CalSTRS, please join officials from New York State, New York City, and Pennsylvania to urge a no vote on Lee Raymond's reelection to the board of JP Morgan Chase at its AGM on Tuesday, May 21st. As well, please ask PERS and STRS to urge large Chase share owners BlackRock and State Street to vote no on Lee Raymond's reelection. Thank you.
Harry, our next caller is Rio.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rio with the Earth Guardians Bay Area crew. You probably recognize my voice because I'm one of the students who has been coming to your board meetings for over a year now. I and other students and teachers have been on hold for almost 3 hours and a half, and I ask you not to shorten our speaking time. Thank you. So I really feel tired and frustrated because we have been asking you to put divestment on the agenda so it can be discussed, but you keep refusing. So even today in the CIO's report, the value of your fossil fuel investments wasn't mentioned. You tell us we should be patient, but the impact of this pandemic is nothing compared to what we will face from the spreading climate crisis. Oh my God. You got upset when we pointed out that we read that in 2017, the CEO and CIOs of CalSTRS each made about $800,000 in just 1 year while choosing to give billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry. Even with your CEO making so much money, he didn't keep his promise to reply to our questions that one of our adult coordinators was emailing about. That's not okay. Last week, I watched a really hard but powerful movie. It was called Virunga, and it's on Netflix. It explains the story of a wildlife reserve in the Congo. It shows how an oil company has been fueling war just to get land for oil drilling, including inside the reserve. There was so much corruption, and the company paid groups to do really horrific things to the people who lived in the area and that tried to protect the land and the animals. I feel really overwhelmed and disgusted after seeing how people are actually getting bribed and killed so companies can get oil out of the ground and into our cars. The company's name was SOCO International. I Googled SOCO and CalSTRS and found that on your June 30th, 2019 list of international equities, SOCO International was listed. The company recently changed its name and even says that they are about sustainable growth. They left Congo but continue to do really horrible things in other places. But this is just one story of so many of the fossil fuel companies you are rewarding with our teachers' money. I'm outraged that you keep saying your engagement strategy is actually a solution. Our Earth Guardians group is partnering with youth activists in Congo who are getting hit with climate disasters already. In the Virunga region, they used to see floods in about 12 villages, but this year over 84 villages were flooded, and they're getting a second hit of floods right now. They lost their schools, clinics, medicine, and most of their crops. We need to stop putting money into fossil fuel companies. There is a clear line drawn in the sand. On one side are indigenous protectors, frontline communities, youth, and everyone working to keep the oil in the ground. On the other side are the climate deniers, fossil fuel companies with CalSTRS pouring money into their mouths to keep them alive, when they clearly are the ones meant to be dying. My main question is today, are you finally ready to step up into the
Harry, our next caller is Megan.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Megan, and I'm a third year at UC Davis. I loved what someone said earlier in the call with respect to the coronavirus vaccine, which was that his faith in humanity was restored by investing to save other people's lives. I'm here to ask you to divest to save other people's lives. Burning fossil fuels is related to the coronavirus in 3 ways. 1, fossil fuel combustion leads to the very respiratory health problems that are making the coronavirus lethal. Also, climate change is increasing prevalence of viral infections, according to researchers at UC Davis. 2, the climate crisis itself is causing immense loss of life, which will worsen. Heat, diarrhea, childhood malnutrition, disasters, food shortages, and vector-borne diseases are among the effects of the climate crisis. 3, the economic impact. CalSTRS has lost more than $19 billion from fossil fuel investments already, and the World Economic Forum considers climate change the #1 threat to the global economy, which relates to your earlier discussion about adjusting your portfolio in consideration of climate change. More personally, my whole life I have known I wanted to be a mother. Now, at 20 years old, every time I consider the possibilities for my future, I confront the projections for our world, the food shortages, droughts, disasters, and heat itself. I am heartbroken that fulfilling my dream of having a family could be unethical. How could I bring someone into a world of such chaos? Please, divest to save other people's lives so that I might have a family someday. Please make fossil fuel divestment a topic for your July agenda.
Our next caller is Jay. Jay, go ahead, you're on the line.
Hello. Hi, my name is Jasia. I am 12 years old, and I am a part of the Earth Guardians Bay Area crew. We asked you questions in March that you still haven't answered. 2 of them were really important to be answered before May. One of them was if you will vote against Lee Raymond being on JP Morgan's board at the annual JP Morgan shareholder meeting in May. He doesn't even believe in climate change. Do you still want to support him on the board? When will you answer the rest of our questions? I come to you today with another question. Are you going to choose my future or supporting fossil fuel companies? We need your money invested in clean energy. On this call right now, there is destruction happening all around me because of this pandemic. The one thing that sometimes brightens my day is going out walking around and seeing the beautiful nature. Have you seen before and after pictures of skies in places like India and China? Because of the decrease in fossil fuel consumption, skies that used to be so polluted you couldn't even see the sky are now clear. Because of less fossil fuels being used, people are able to breathe better. Because of less fossil fuels, there is less destruction. This illness is something that I hope will never happen again, but this destruction, if you don't divest, will. This destruction will be the result of climate change. Let's face it, engagement does not work. The whole company is fossil fuels. It embodies the destruction of my future, embodies the destruction of the youth's future, your children's future. When I am old and my grandchild asks me, why didn't you stop the destruction? I'm going to be able to answer, I tried. I tried to help and save you, and I tried to keep this destruction from happening. But will you? Will the heavy guilt that you didn't do as much as you could weigh on your shoulders? You can tell yourself that engaging in fossil fuels you're engaging in fossil fuels for the right reasons, but you're not. When you have grandchildren and they ask you the questions that they ask me, you won't be able to say that you did all you could, because deep inside, I really believe that giving money to fossil fuel companies is not right. Please listen to it. Listen to that little voice inside your head telling you that it is not right, no matter what your position is, and be brave. Speak and
Our next caller is Joan. Joan, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. We have been waiting on the line for almost 3 hours. My name is Joan Lowen. I live in Oakland. I'm the 76-year-old spouse of a CalSTRS retiree. And I'm calling today to urge the board, along with the voices you've just heard, to put divestment from fossil fuel on the July agenda. It needs to be brought forth. When cities like New York and London are moving to divest, when huge universities like the University of California have voted to divest, when science tells us that we must leave 80% or more of our fossil fuel in the ground to avoid further climate catastrophe, when youth like the ones you heard from today around the planet are lying down in front of banks and lying down in front of CalSTRS, begging with their bodies for institutions to stop funding fossil fuel, when communities of color and other marginalized communities suffering from the toxic effects of fossil fuel extraction on their air, water, and land are disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus, when fossil fuel stocks are plummeting along with the demand, why is CalSTRS dragging its oil-drenched heels on this issue that carries so much financial as well as climate risk for our teachers, for our pension fund, for our planet? For the sake of my 14 great nieces and nephews who will inherit this planet in whatever shape we leave it, please act swiftly and with courage to move the divestment question to your July agenda. Thank you.
Our next caller is Rick. Rick, go ahead, you're on the line.
Thank you. My name is Rick. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Rick, we can hear you.
Okay, Curly. I'm a teacher for 30 years, a member of the United Educators of San Francisco, and I'm currently retired and receive my paycheck from CalSTRS. My field is economics, and I would like to tell you that it is true that this crisis is unprecedented. However, it was not unexpected. There are people who've been talking about pandemics for years and have said we needed to prepare for pandemics. So this is unprecedented, but it's not unexpected. I'd also like to point out that we've had 2 economic crises in the last less than 12 years. So you better be prepared for more economic crises because they're going to come. And furthermore, they will come with a climate crisis that is right on our doorsteps. Now, a lot of people chose to ignore the scientists who said pandemics are a possibility, and people are ignoring the scientists who say that climate crisis is a certainty. So I would like to ask you to protect my future, not just my financial future, my future to live. And I would like to ask you that you put this on the agenda. It has to be at the top of the agenda. I waited for 3 hours today to make a comment. That's not right. That's absolutely not right. This is something that people want to talk about. So I would like you to just, have the courage, get rid of those securities. I will tell you, Warren Buffett just dumped all of his airline stocks because he realized they're valueless. And you should dump all of your fossil fuels because they're just as valueless. So please listen to that very eloquent people who spoke before me. I know that you people are hardworking. I appreciate that. But you've got to really undo what you've learned in college and start looking at the real world and make some projections based on the real world and not on these economic and business projections that really bear no relationship to reality. This idea of a rational market is nuts. Thank you.
And our last caller is Magdalena. Magdalena, go ahead, you're on the line.
sounds like you just kicked my brother Leo, and my Earth Guardian friend Josiah off the call. But you can't censor us. My name is Magdalena. I'm 12 years old and a proud member of Earth Guardian's Bay Area crew. I have been coming since last May with other youth and adult allies. In a pandemic, while entire regions and communities are starving and left to the side, you keep giving money to companies that lie and cause destruction and are trying to get even more oil out while everyone is focused on a pandemic. I am heartbroken that you are still playing this game with the fossil fuel industry. Why do you still want to engage with the fossil fuel industry when they are all about taking oil out of where it belongs? The urgency and irony that you still think it's fine and the right thing to support communities that the companies that thrive off the backs of people and the planet. The Earth can't take any more of your engagement, and neither can we. The fossil fuel industry can't change their ways. That's their job, to make money from destruction of indigenous sacred land and lives. The people and nature on the front lines and youth are needing you to stop and hear our cries. Wake up and act. Indigenous leaders, frontline communities, science, nature, and the youth have been screaming, but you're still wearing your greenwashing act. Diversity, including people to the tables, is also listening to the ones living, going to work and school on the front lines of the climate emergency because of environmental racism and classism. My teachers are losing money, and we youth are losing our future and home. So why are you scared to stand with your money for the truth, for our and your future existence? We will be living with the mess you made. It scares me to think of my future. The virus is just a dress rehearsal for what is coming. This is a warning. We will be living with fires, landslides, floods, storms, and drought. This is not the future my teachers want for me and other youth, and you work for the teachers. Teachers work for many years teaching the youth, but now without much knowledge are letting our future die and crumble. You work for the teachers, and the teachers teach us, and we give up our childhood for the planet and future. I will not end with hope. I'm going to end with this. As Aiden from YVA told you last May, the future has its eyes on you.
Harry, that concludes public comment.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, members of the public, for your comments and for your patience today as we navigate this new format of running a meeting. We'll certainly evaluate what's the best time in the agenda to hear from members of the public so that you're not necessarily inconvenienced as we try to balance the business of managing the portfolio at the same time. I want to thank everyone for getting through this agenda. Thank the staff, Brian, and the communications team that helped coordinate and facilitate that. That was well done. I really appreciate it on behalf of the committee. Thank you very much. Sharon, I'll turn it over to you as the chair of the board in terms of timing and lunch break and when we're going to come back.
It's lunchtime. Again, I appreciate Harry's comments and the public comment. I mean, it's the first time we've done this, and so we want to be responsive, and we'll have our questionnaire that we do every time after today that Amy will send out. So please give us feedback on things, lessons learned, like maybe breaking up a meeting into two pieces, 2 different days, which is what I'm picking up from this one. So we're going to break for lunch, and we're going to come back at 2:30. Hopefully that gives you, it's 2:05. So, and I apologize. I know we planned it on me ending around 2:45 or 3, but we're probably going to go until, I'm guessing, about 4-ish, if that's, I know other people might have other calls. I apologize for that. Well, we'll do our best to get through the rest of the agenda. We have, a valuation action item and a couple of other items as well. So take a break and remember to come back on this line, the open session line, at 2:30. Did I get everything right, Jack? Anything else?
Perfect. All right. All right.
Thanks.
No problem.
It's like a show right now. Start from the top, Jennifer.
Control gate here. For the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Yamanaka.
Yeah, I represent the superintendent. Yes, I'm here.
Sorry. I let in with 4D and it was a little blurred there. forgive me. Mr. Prezant,
Here.
Ms. Yamamoto,
Here.
Ms. Bradford,
Here.
Mr. Thiele,
Here.
Ms. Hika.
Here.
For the State Treasurer, Mr. Seha. That was a yes. Director of Finance, Ms. Miller.
Here.
All right, Chairperson Hendricks, you have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And before we go to item 5, I think I need to report out from closed session. We did take one action item, which was, I just have to say that, right? We took action on an item. Jennifer, do I have to say anything else?
No.
Okay. I'm looking for Melissa and people, but that's okay. I think we're good. All right. So that takes us to item 5, and I believe that's you, Jack.
It is. This is your annual election of board officers and also the approval of the committee assignments. And the committee assignments take effect for our next meeting. So hopefully, if you're all satisfied with them, we will use those. So this is the one part of the meeting I run. So I'm going to first open up to nominations for board chair for fiscal year 2021. Do we have any nominations?
Jack, it's Joy. My hand's raised. I don't know if you want me to just pipe.
Oh, I don't have a visibility of that. I'm sorry.
Oh.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Joy. Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Jack, and thank you everyone. I know it's been a long day, and I think we've gotten a lot done. Just a couple of comments I wanted to make before I offer a nomination. I just really would like to recognize and thank Sharon and Harry for their leadership as our chair and vice chair this past year. The two of you lead us with integrity and empathy and humility. You value and really respect different perspectives that we bring to the board or that stakeholders bring to us. And most importantly, you really keep us focused on our core mission and who we're here to serve, which are our teachers. As the chair and vice chair, the way you partner together leads to lead our board such a great and positive tone. And I know this will continue as you continue to work together with the board, with the CalSTRS leadership and team as we navigate our path forward. It'll be rocky and it'll probably be wiggly.
Probably will.
But we'll work together. So having said that, it is my honor to nominate Harry Keeley to be the chair of the CalSTRS board.
All right. Thank you, Joy. And do we have a second for that nomination from Joy?
I second that.
Second from Karen. Thank you. And do we have any other nominations for chair of the board? Seeing none, then I will close the nominations. All those in favor of the nomination, please say aye or raise your hand I can. All right. Any opposed?
Wait, I should raise my hand. Sorry.
Then by unanimous consent, Mr. Keeley, you are the board chair for the coming year. Congratulations.
As I say, congratulations, I think.
That was a quiet. All right. Then now we must proceed for nominations for the vice chair of the board for the fiscal year. Do we have any nominations? Gail, were you nominating? I saw a little yellow hand on your thing. I didn't know what that was.
So Jack, if you look at the left
I'm happy to make a nomination if that's appropriate, Mr. and Mrs. Chair.
Oh, I see. Joy, you still got your hand up still, I see.
No, I was clapping for Harry and Sharon, but and I will let Joy take over. It's a reaction, Jack. You can have thumbs up or clapping.
Yeah, it was an emotional moment.
I think we're all used to using emojis with cell phones, but if this way of life continues, we might have to learn how to use them with Zoom too. So, well, thank you and congratulations, Harry. Before I make a nomination, I just want to also make some comments. Our past chair for the year, Sharon, is a woman of incredible talent. In addition to serving as our board chair the past year, she was also elected by asset owners from around the world to be a director on the PRI Association board, which I think is an amazing accomplishment. And it's amazing for CalSTRS because her leadership on that board has helped us and will continue to help us extend our voice globally on important issues related to responsible investment. And while I know we are really focused on a lot of the challenges that we have ahead, with the fund and with the portfolio, I think responsible investing and all that stands for is something that's been a hallmark and core to our system. And knowing that Sharon will be able to continue doing that and representing us and bringing those views back to us to inform what we do will continue to be really important. So thank you, Sharon. And I'm pleased to nominate Sharon Hendricks to be the vice chair of the board.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And do we have a second for that nomination?
I will second.
Thank you, Betty. So any other nominations before the board for vice chair? Seeing none, the nominations are closed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Congratulations. You're in it for another 12 months.
Can I just make one comment, if I may?
Absolutely. Please do.
Just because I think today is a perfect example of why I missed you guys so much and why our board works so effectively is we are colleagues and sometimes we disagree and we do that respectfully. We have different ways of thinking of things. We have different backgrounds and different ways we come to this board. But since I've been on this board 8 years, one of the hallmarks to me is we can disagree agreeably and we can be collegial without being overly nice, if you know what I mean by that, right? Because those people that it's nice, but there's not that sharpening of each other too. And so I think, my partnership with Dana and Harry through CTA has been so significant, and now with Denise coming on board. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud that in the midst of other teacher labor wars, other places, that we don't have that at CalSTRS, and that we are partners building each other up. And it's an honor to serve as an active teacher, the three of us on this board, and to lead it is an honor and a privilege. And I've been really grateful to have that honor this last year. And to me, it's all about, like today, demonstrating how we can support each other through our skills and making the board better. So I'm excited about Harry being chair. I'm excited that the band is still together. He and I are going to be chair and vice chair, continuing on the good work at CalSTRS. So appreciate that.
Fabulous. Thank you. And then if everyone is comfortable with the committees, did any other changes from anyone now that we've got the template out? Does that work for everyone? Okay.
Can I make one other comment? Oh, sorry, Matt had his hand up.
Yeah, we had you we sent out an amended version, Matt. Hopefully you saw that with your elections on that. We're not picking up your voice though, for some reason, even though you're not muted. Are you really talking?
Oh, are you? Can you hear me now again?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Weird. So no, I had a chance to talk to the treasurer about the assignments earlier, and she just had a small request. I know that she was, I think, added to the compensation committee, and she was just asking that to not be added and maintain her committees that she previously had in the last fiscal year.
So you're saying she wants to stay on the committee she was on last year? Is that what you're saying, Matt?
Correct. Yeah, she was hoping to stay on those. I think that she was added to compensation, and she was just hoping to keep the ones that she had previously.
Got it. So we need to pull her up comp. Okay, got it. No worries.
Yeah, and I double checked. I mean, at least the requirements of how many board members. It looked like it was still okay. So
it is. Yeah. Yeah, you got 5 members then on the committee, and we just need 3. Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you, Matt.
I just want to make one last quick comment about the investment committee too, just because I've also appreciated the leadership of the investment committee, and we've made some changes this year, and I'm really excited about the transition. Harry's been so phenomenal on the investment committee. We thought it might be too much to do investment committee and the board, so I'm glad that he's been willing to be vice chair and have Joy step into the role of chairing the investment committee this next year. I think that just seems really exciting, and in the spirit of us all learning new skills, I just feel like I don't know. I love that. I'm an educator. I love people learning and getting new opportunities. So it makes me happy looking at all of you and thinking, I hope that, we just have different opportunities to step into leadership roles at different points with our expertise. And that's a pretty great thing. Anything else, Jack?
That's it. Congratulations.
Yay. All right, we're going to move to item 6, which is the CEO report. Jack.
Yeah. I'll do this, and then Julie will come right after me with the risk management report, which they really fit together well. I mean, you've heard a lot of generalities already today about the transition to teleworking, but we wanted to make sure you knew exactly what was going on. Also, I think what's a little different in this report that you have before you, which I'm really proud of that the staff was able to do this, is we've got measurement. It isn't just saying to you, yeah, it's all working and we're paying the bills and we're doing this. We've actually tried to measure week by week how each of the production areas is doing and compare that to pre-COVID and during the COVID crisis. So we actually, not only can we assure you and our executive staff that we're getting the work done, but where there are some gems here of success, there's some lessons here that tell us that we better not go back to the old way of doing things either, because there are absolutely some signals in this data that would tell us that we need to take some different courses on coming back. So just some broad comments. We, Cassandra has really been our point person and led our EOC from the beginning, the Emergency Operations Center. So there she is. So she has led the team and works on this every day a little bit on what we're doing, and not just in terms of getting us out the door in the home environment, but now her heavy load is working on the task force to return at some point in time. But as you can see by the dates of this, we convened that EOC quite early in the process, and for many years we've had a plan in place. And we've done tabletop exercises, including a pandemic exercise, oddly enough, many years ago, where we simulated a flu coming in from Hong Kong. And we talked about what that would mean for the organization. But we certainly never expected it to be this level of a footprint on the organization, requiring us to have all 1,200 employees go home. You know, our first look back on this telecommuting is that there's been a couple, either through good planning or a little luck, there's been a couple of very critical technology issues that went our way and that has made this work very well. And it's 5 things. And I just want to make sure you kind of hear those so you kind of appreciate just how pivotal they are to everybody else doing their jobs. First off is that we moved away from desktop computers. Now, I've got some friends that work in financial services organizations, and they have classic computers, desktop screens, a CPU beside their desk. And when it came time for those companies to go home, they couldn't do it. They had all this equipment that was really stuck in the office. So Ashish and his team had moved us to laptop scenarios some time ago, and they plug into a desktop in our office. So absolutely, that made it easier for us to be able to send employees home right away with a laptop computer. And then we also allowed them to take their monitors home too, because for some of our staff, it's just too constraining looking at a laptop all day long to do transactions on a screen and use our system. So number 1, having laptops. Number 2, we had gravitated the organization to using Microsoft 365. A lot of you probably use that on your home computers, but offices are still making that transition, but thankfully we had all gravitated to that. We're ready to use that office suite. Thirdly, we had our imaging system well running so that documents that are put into the imaging system in the mailroom and scanning facility are accessible to all of us at our homes. So having that scanning software available to us. We were using a Genesis platform for our call center in the office. But again, our technology staff and Bill and the benefit staff were able to expand that platform to home use. So really, I mean, much to our pleasant surprise, the call center and all those that need to work with our members had a platform available fluidly to be able to use at home. And then fifthly, and most importantly, we started out on those first couple of days with about 400 employees having access, remote access into our core systems. And again, Ashish, the technology branch, all the staff worked hard to quickly expand those nodes so that everyone in the organization had availability to use the core systems. So those 5 technology drivers really enabled us to get to where we wanted to be today and what we're doing. This report goes through, it isn't the whole organization. I wanted to just, for this report, highlight primarily the member-facing aspects of the organization, so you feel you understand how the members are impacted, as well as for Julie's area, are we getting the money in the door from the schools so that it gets invested appropriately. So as you go through this report, page by page, I think it's pretty clear for all the service areas, they're performing at a very good level of performance. And then we've got a few that are performing even better than they have before. And I do highlight the call center particularly, because it is tough work for us, and we're always watching out to make sure we're doing well with that. But on TRB 18, if you can see their telework results, they are exceeding their targets that we set for them, their annual performance targets. And their average speed to answer is 30 seconds. And I couldn't be more proud. I mean, if you've done any phone calling during this period of time with any of businesses you do business with, it would be pretty rare anybody would pick up the phone in 30 seconds and talk to you. And so all those benefits and services staff are working hard to make sure that we get these numbers where they are. But these are incredible statistics on this page. Absolutely great. So throughout the whole report, I think you'll see good stories in each of the areas of the organization. And also the money coming in from the county offices has been coming in on time. And when Julie does her risk report in a minute, if she wants to add commentary to that. But again, I think, the things we have control of, we can actively manage. We all worry about supply chain failures. For us, the supply chain is actually the money coming in from all the school districts. And that has not been the problem we all foresee. We all made a short list of things we thought this is definitely going to go wrong. And actually, it's worked very well. The whole ecosystem of collection and payment going throughout the system. And of course, the checks have all gone out appropriately to our retirees. Our only stress point has been on the international mailings that Julie can talk about in the risk report. In terms of challenges, things we're starting to see right now bubble up that are a bit of an issue. This is getting to be long. So although people took a laptop home with them, not everyone has a home office. So all the things that we enjoy in working in an office setting, the ergonomics, the desk, someone cleaning every night with anesthesia, all the things that you do in an office setting don't go on in your home. So, I mean, as we think about this long term, and if we're thinking this could be not just months, but could be a year maybe for some employees, we need to think about that home office and making sure it's supportive of the health of the staff while they're home. We realize just how dependent we are on the mailroom and the scan facility. We're averaging about 50 employees in the office every day. But a core part of that is that mailroom scan staff, because they're bringing the documents into the system for the rest of us for use. So that's a very strong dependency. We still have some paper. We've reduced a lot of paper, but we still have paper that has to go out to the members, especially for our retirement readiness staff and doing estimates and counseling. So on Wednesdays, the benefits and services staff comes into the office, a small contingent, but they're preparing the packets and they're mailing those out to the staff. So we're still dependent upon that. We still need some hardware, some better headsets for our staff that are home, not only for having inbound calls, but so they can make outbound calls. And then finally, I'm sure you've all used DocuSign in your personal life for a mortgage or some other piece, but it's turning out to be such a valuable technology. We do a lot of document work with the controller's office and other parts of the organization, and having DocuSign is truly a godsend, and we can expand its use within CalSTRS as well. So those are some of the challenges we want to work on. So now we're turning the corner and thinking about things. And I just want to share a few minutes, just kind of set our perspective on this. And I know we're starting to see some signs of retail opening up. And, I think as people get the taste for fresh air, the taste for retail transactions, that's going to create a lot of that external energy. But I will tell you, our executive staff and the team that Cassandra's put together for the return to the office, we have a very conservative view of this. And we absolutely are not going to rush into this and not rush to have people back in the office. it's very clear to us we're not going to turn the green light on and ask everybody to come to work in June or July. It could be a period of many, many months of gradually bringing back employees, and it could go into 2021. I hate to say, but there are just so many issues. As someone said earlier today, going back to the office is a lot harder than leaving the office. The areas of social distancing, tracing, testing, what happens when someone does get contaminated, all the things that will happen. We've got to think through and do it in a slow, methodical, safe process. And that's the message we're trying to send out to our staff. So it's possible we may see some signs of life in the building in June, but I think it's going to be later than that before much gets going. And issues around travel and visitors are also compelling issues that we're going to have to think about to get right. So bear with us. It will keep you updated, of course. But we're doing a survey this week of the staff and trying to, make sure we kind of appreciate what the experience has been like for them telecommuting, because I think there's an opportunity here for some of the staff, I don't know if it's much or some, to remain in a telecommuting status. So we want to appreciate that better. And then we want to understand what we need to do to get people back in the office. So Cassandra and her task force will digest all that data next week. And when it comes in, and start to really develop a concerted plan around that. And Cassandra, I want to let you jump in too, if you'd like. You've been doing so much of the work, leading everything. Were there parts of that you want to reemphasize or?
No, I think you went over it really well. We're just extraordinarily happy that we were able to transition so quickly and so seamlessly. It was a lot of hard work and coordinated effort. And just to underscore that we initiated the EOC March 2nd, which was far faster and sooner, I think, than anybody else had really been thinking that the pandemic was going to go in such a trajectory that we have ended up in. And so we started planning early on, and Ashish was working early on at ramping up the bandwidth of our technology systems. And again, underscoring that we had been preparing for our ability to be mobile years ago when we started assigning laptops to everybody, because we wanted to be able to have the flexibility to work in different environments. So it's all gone well. I agree. Again, I want to underscore that we are going to take a cautious and very thoughtful approach at bringing people back in, because there's so many considerations in doing that, and it is and could be very high risk. And we want to make sure that we're just able to do our core mission of collecting the contributions, investing contributions, and paying our members as the primary focus, with coupled with keeping our staff healthy and safe. So I think we're doing a great job at executing that with all the help that we have in the organization.
Thanks, Cassandra. Yeah, I mean, I think emotionally, in the first weeks when we've gone home, everyone clearly was challenged. They wanted to get it right. There was an awful lot of energy to get it done. And now that we're setting into a longer term vision of this, I think it's our job to figure out, how do we keep that morale up? How do we keep people communicating and the social connections that you need in a workplace? Some of our employees don't like telecommuting. They actually want to get back and see a fellow human being, not on a video screen. So there's a lot of psychological aspects to this if we're going to be doing this for the long term. So that's another aspect of this around communication tools. And we've introduced some social tools into our toolkit with the staff, and trying to do some fun things with the staff to keep people motivated, interested, connected to the organization and what we do. I was going to talk a little bit about the headquarters expansion, unless anyone had a question just about the transition itself.
I don't see anyone, Jack.
Okay. Just, a good surprise. I mean, the building construction is going quite readily by the time. Well, if September's our next physical meeting in the building, you're going to see a number of levels of the parking garage completed by September. We've had minor issues to deal with in terms of change orders, nothing that in any way threatens the budget. So there's nothing to highlight there per se. We certainly have had to introduce a number of procedures around screening the construction workers before they get on the site. So this is certainly new for construction workers to fill out questionnaires and have their temperature taken before they get on the construction site. But we have to be that careful with them as well in what they're doing. When we first went into this COVID mode, I was really concerned that we would have a lot of supply chain problems with materials. Because the project is moving quickly, although for the most part, we're focused on concrete right now. So it's one particular supply chain link that we need. But again, our team has not identified yet any weaknesses in that supply chain, even though we have materials coming in from a lot of different places, in the case of a couple of materials, even overseas. But so far, there has not been any time delays in that supply chain. So the construction is still on target, and we have not had many rain days. So we've not used many rain days in the schedule either. So all good there. I mean, to our, hopefully you saw in the write-up, amazingly, this project was named Environmental Bond of the Year, like for the world. I mean, it's the organization that does this. So that was just real nice to see, because as you remember, it was really the board that came up with the idea of even doing this with a bond, and it morphed into a green bond. And it's just nice to see that ended up as a side benefit to the project. So great to see that. And Julie's staff has done so much work to make sure that it was the green bond piece of it was done right. So I think that's all I had to focus on. If you didn't have any more questions, I'll let Julie just kind of morph into this and do the risk.
I did just want to mention before you hand it off to Julie that I really, if you're aware, but Jack was doing these like Jimmy Fallon imitation like videos. If you watch some of the late night guys doing the stuff at home, Samantha Bee too, so women as well. But Jack, you did I think that personal touch and kind of using some humor in the midst of a really challenging situation just demonstrates your strength as a leader. I also do want to do a shout out to Ashish. At my campus, our DE coordinators, which is like your distance ed coordinator, those people in particular are just completely overloaded right now. And I feel like Ashish is like our DE coordinator. He's like the IT guy kind of. And so I know it takes a village and there's a team behind him, but I just do want to thank him for helping to kind of facilitate that process along with Lisa and lots of other people. Hi, Ashish. So I know all the executives and their teams have done so much work. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So Julie, do you want to talk us through the risk report? Because risk is something that we've definitely been thinking about the last 8 weeks for sure.
That's for sure. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Julie Underwood, Chief Financial Officer. And as you've been hearing all day regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, CalSTRS faced an unprecedented time where our risks quickly escalated into issues that needed immediate management while we still worked to mitigate and manage other ongoing risks that were evolving and changing at a very rapid pace. Now, this is the normal time where we would have presented to you our normal semi-annual risk report with our updated heat map, but due to the timing and the fluid and unpredictable nature of the pandemic, and just how quickly we had to deal with both risks and with issues that resulted from it, we felt it would be prudent to provide you a risk report that focuses on our mitigations associated with the pandemic from a risk and an issue perspective for each of our 10 risk categories. Now, since the report before you is comprehensive, and considering that the investment committee this morning and Jack's CEO report included many discussions with you on many of the risks and issues that we faced, I'll just touch on a few of our top risk areas and issues as we're continuing to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. First, I wanted to talk just a little bit about technology and tell you that I'm pleased to report to you that there have been no elevation of phishing attempts or fraud campaigns when compared to prior to the pandemic that we're aware of, but we do continue to monitor our systems very closely. From an essential services perspective on the investments, I just want to reiterate what Geraldine had told the investment committee this morning. We do have sufficient liquidity to pay member benefits well into the future. Our benefits are secure and continue to be paid timely. Now, we do rely on the state controller's office to assist us with our payment process, and they have assured us that our benefit payments are also their priority, and we do thank them for their continued partnership. Now, we are currently monitoring the delays in international delivery of mail in some areas. We are monitoring the suspended service areas for both USPS and FedEx. And so far, we've been able to utilize DHL for some of these mailings when we need it. Contributions continue to be paid and member files continue to be submitted by our employers despite school closures, as was mentioned earlier, and we continue to monitor the impacts on school budgets relative to the state's projections for lower than anticipated revenue. Just wanted to quickly mention a few things on our funding plan. Our actuaries are monitoring the markets and their potential impact to future contribution rates, but it is too early to determine how the pandemic will affect our funding levels. Now, we do expect the state to reassess their 2021 supplemental payment to us as a result of lower than expected revenues, but note that this payment was not included in the most recent actuarial valuation. Now, we are beginning to hear of some advocacy calling for suspending contribution increases and pension reform. Now, as you may be aware, if contributions are delayed now, they could be even higher in later years, so we are monitoring very closely for all pension reform efforts. Now, in Jack's CEO report, there's some information about the budget. Because the state is projecting such large decreases in their state revenues, we believe that's going to have long-term implications to both the state and to our employers. And because we are supportive of the state's objectives to maintain a balanced budget, we are recommending to reduce the board-approved 2021 operating budget by $8.7 million. Now that includes $3.9 million for 27 permanently authorized positions and $4.8 million for contract expenditures. Now, we will still be moving forward with our request for the $53 million to fund the completion of the pension solution project, as delaying that project would cost more in the long run. Now, with our proposed reductions, we are currently reprioritizing and evaluating the long-term impacts to the organization's strategic initiatives, with the goal to keep those initiatives on track and maintain our service levels while being extremely prudent in expenditure of our resources given the current state of affairs. Now, we will provide you with the revised operating budget at the July board meeting. Regarding staffing, just wanted to mention here that we are monitoring absences due to COVID-19 and the added benefit provisions in the Emergency Family Medical Leave and Paid Sick Leave Acts. Now, as of earlier this week, we have 67 active requests, and currently we are able to absorb most of that workload since approximately 70% of those absences are intermittent only. And we are, as mentioned earlier, working on return to work scenarios, and also we need to think about potential resurgence scenarios as well, with the goal to preserve the health and safety of our employees. Now, regarding the 3 large projects for the collaborative model, you heard a bit of that this morning at the investment committee. So I'll just add that work does continue on the Pillars project. There were some minor delays in that project, but staff has prioritized and are working on the highest priority goals. And we continue to monitor the resources to support that project. And staff will provide the investment committee a more updated update in July on the progress of the Pillars project. And Jack already updated you on the headquarters expansion. So the only thing I'll add on that is that we do continue to monitor all the risks in the project. We receive regular updates at the headquarters expansion executive steering committee meetings. For the pension solution project, so far that project continues with minimal loss in productivity related to the pandemic, but we could experience setbacks if the shelter-in-place orders are prolonged, since this is a project that requires continuous communication and collaboration. Now, the user acceptance testing and training are upcoming activities, and we are currently developing mitigation strategies to convert these efforts from in-person to virtual experiences to minimize the impact. In addition, you may recall from the last board meeting that our contractor CGI started experiencing delays in their contractor acceptance testing. Now, these delays are continuing and are estimated to cause an overall 1 to 2 month delay. Now, we do have a 3-month contingency in the schedule. but these delays may likely impact the compression of the remaining activities that both staff and CGI need to perform. Now, we do have some ability to overlap testing activities to mitigate the extent of some of the delay. So we're actively monitoring CGI's test results on a weekly basis and communicating with them on the impact of these delays. So overall, I'll just say that we do continue to monitor all the risks for the Pension Solution Project, and we receive regular updates on the project's risks at the Pension Solution Executive Steering Committee meetings.
Great.
Now, overall, for the strategic plan, right now we are experiencing some short-term setbacks in some initiatives. So, for example, promoting the Pension 2 participation is a lot more challenging given the current market volatility as well as school closures. However, I'd say overall, we do remain on target to accomplish the board's strategic plan, but we will continue to monitor our progress and will notify the board should significant risks arise. Lastly, just wanted to mention a little bit about third-party risk. Again, we're not experiencing significant issues with supply chain or non-performance issues, other than some delays in small items like obtaining masks and sanitizer, as many of us are also experiencing. So I just say overall, considering what we've recently been through, our business operations and our risk profile do remain stable under our new normal as we work differently with an added emphasis on COVID-19 risks and issues. So our focus now will be on managing continuing issues while still monitoring the risk areas reflected on TRB 39, including those return to work scenarios and accomplishment of the board's strategic plan, as well as keeping a watchful eye on our customer service levels and our key performance indicators. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that we did kick off our annual risk awareness online training for all staff on May 1st, and that training will reiterate the importance of risk management. So that's my prepared remarks. I'll open it up if you have any questions.
Really, thank you. And thank you again. I know Harry and I got to meet with you and walk through this. I just appreciate your precision, your focus, the structure in which you present things. That as a fiduciary, we want to make sure we understand all the things that we're supposed to have oversight in terms of risk, and you've really given us a helpful document. So I appreciate that. I've got a couple people in line, Joy and then Bill. So Joy.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sharon. And I don't know if this question is to Jack, to you, or to Julie, but it goes to the headquarters expansion project. We've spent a lot of time throughout the day talking about the uncertainty that we have, including return to work, both for CalSTRS and how you're managing that for our workforce, but also just for the for the general public, for people we work with. And I guess I wondered, with the expansion project, have we given thought to how what we designed and approved and are moving forward with pre-COVID, whether that needs to be adjusted, kind of given the new world? I know that's maybe hard to assess given the uncertainty, but things like space per employee, the type of open space environments, those are all the kinds of things that businesses seem to be thinking about. And I wondered how we're factoring that in.
Yeah, and thank you, Joy. And we actually are talking a lot about that issue because it is hard to know, to make purchasing conclusions on how we feel today, this month, in the middle of this, versus how is this going to feel in a business setting 36 months from now. And that is tricky because you're trying to make a fairly expensive furniture purchase for a building. So we are trying to navigate that. But two things. On the current office tower, there are parts of our current office tower that do not fit a 6-foot social distancing standard. So either A, we'll have to do some physical changes to that setting, which costs money, or what I said to you originally is if we're bringing people in slowly or on a rotational basis, we may not have to change things physically in the current office tower. We can achieve that distancing just by calibrating the return volume into the building. Relative to the new facility, we're just in the early conversation with the furniture vendor, and you'll be interested that the titles to their documents that they share with us actually say on that pre-COVID, COVID for furniture design. So these furniture designers are doing their thinking on different ways of twisting the office. As someone sneezes, where is that going to land? If I twisted the office over here, would it land differently? So they're getting to that level of detail, looking at changing surfaces that our hands are on, just like you touch our door handles now that are, antiseptically clean. Can we have work surfaces that way? So I think we're okay in terms of the timing of this, of getting some benefit of research. We don't have to make a buying decision for several months. So we've tasked the furniture vendor with that research, but we will be making changes. The short answer is what we probably initially thought the design would look like is going to have to be changed, and there'll be more physical separation in the space and what we do. So we're going to have to absolutely be flexible around that, what we do. The other thing is just in terms of the volumes of people we projected to be in the building. This can go both ways. On the one hand, if we end up leaving a contingent at home on a permanent, semi-permanent basis, then we have less need for people in the building and more space. On the other hand, if we're changing the space in the building to give people a little more space, then that may take up that extra space. But bottom line is we do have a buffer here. If it turns out we would move more people into the expansion headquarters, then frankly we'll lease out another floor and bring more revenue into CalSTRS. So we've got some flexibility that way. But right now it's not looking like that's going to happen because of the changes in the people's social distancing expectations. I think it's going to turn out we end up filling up the space just with the different configuration. In our offices, we're always a little bit smaller than state government offices. When we built the headquarters tower, we didn't look to other state agencies really for our thinking. We went to San Francisco and really benchmarked the financial services organizations, which tend to be a little tighter with their real estate. And they tend to watch the bottom line a little tougher on office space. So ours are not that big to begin with, as I would say. So yeah, it's going to weigh on us a lot how to figure that out.
We've got a couple more folks in the queue. Bill and then Harry.
Thank you. I don't know who I should answer this question. Maybe it's Brian. If, for example, one of the employers, the school district, were to take the position that they're going to take, maybe not even take the position, but be unable to make the contribution in a timely way, or claim to be unable to make that contribution, is there a remedy available to force an employer to make a contribution? I know that's sort of a rash statement, but you look at the funding plan, and our funding plan is so inherently driven by the elements, which are investment returns and employer and employee contributions, as well as the state. And here we are, we're facing a variety of elements which put all of those at risk. And so my question is there a remedy? And if not, in what way are we engaging? I know there's one remark in this report was that discussions and consultations are being held with stakeholders, including the administration, the legislature, and I'm sure employers, regarding the funding plan. What's going on there?
I'll address the first part of your question. I think the second part is probably more from Jack and Julie. So the employer contributions are mandated by statute. So if the employers did not contribute, they would be in violation of the law. Who would enforce the law? Who are the interested parties? So, there are legal remedies when there's a violation of a statute. Hopefully we don't get to that point, but if we did, then we would explore what those opportunities are, whether it's a motion for declarative relief or there's some other sort of drastic function. But I really do think that the organization is more geared towards the second part of your question, right, which is the part I think that I'm not the person qualified to answer that part of the question.
Well, just to add on to, and Julie, you manage this for us. We have had the experience where a school has not paid us. So we have test-driven part of the law, not in court. but we have test driven this when a charter school faced bankruptcy. So we do have that issue of financial risk now around those types of situations. So resolving that, and frankly, involves the state controller's office, since they control the appropriations going to the school. And frankly, it's a delicate political issue. I'm not going to make it sound like, sure, it's simple to solve, and it wasn't simple the time we had it. But there were mechanisms to make sure that CalSTRS was fully paid when we did have a bankruptcy situation. But clearly, as Brian indicated, the courts have another alternative. Julie, did you want to add anything to that piece of that?
I think you said it well, Jack. We have legal remedies because it is required by law to pay the contributions. And so we would work with our legal department should we not receive contributions. But we try really hard to work with our employers, especially if they're having issues with reporting and paying, and we do our best to work with them when we can. And that I have a whole staff dedicated to do that. And so we do our best to try not to get to that point.
In terms of the political question you asked about schools and I guess how they're approaching this dilemma, I mean, unfortunately, in our jobs, we're fiduciaries and we have a pretty narrow view. We've got to support the funding plan and making sure that what gets paid, what gets owed gets paid, and that we don't make political decisions over the funding of the plan. So, we don't have any opportunity for forgiveness or delay for a school's financial plight, to the extent that is facing some schools, and I'm sure it is. Their ability to resolve that lies with the administration and looking at ways that the administration funds them or can help in other ways. And those conversations absolutely are going on with the administration. And I think the schools recognize that that's the dialogue they have to have. For us here today, and in just a few minutes, we'll be doing the actuarial valuation. I mean, there is no wiggle room for us. We have to keep the train moving toward full funding, and we know the law. And to the extent the valuation suggests changes that you have to make, we have to move forward with those.
Speaking of Jack, I'm going to move us forward. Harry has his hand up, and then I think we're going to move from Harry's comment to the next item. So Go ahead, Harry.
Thanks, Julie, for your report. And thanks for your responsiveness to the letter that Sharon and I, in consultation with Brian, board's attorney, drafted for management around risk oversight in our role. We had a chance to speak earlier in the week, and I just think it's important for other people to hear this. It's possible that rather than at least for the upcoming fiscal year, rather than doing this semi-annually, it might merit a quarterly report to the board. Short-term risks, the medium-term risks, and the long-term.
Harry, we've got some interruption on your audio feed again.
Yeah. Am I back?
You're back, but we didn't get the middle part. We just got the beginning and the end.
Anyway, I'm going to.
Medium, long-term.
Yeah, so perhaps rather than doing it semi-annually, this risk report to the board in our oversight role, we may consider doing this quarterly. We can talk with Jack and Cassandra and Sharon for the year ahead, and then breaking these risks down into immediate risks, short-term risks, medium-term risks, long-term risks, and existential risks to the fund. And what is the appropriate monitoring mechanisms? What is being done to mitigate these risks? And then ultimately how to report these risks to the board. So in talking with you and Jack and Cassandra and Sharon, and I think we bring Brian into the conversation as well at some point, we might want to change the pacing of the risk reports and fine tune them a little bit, because we may also have to be talking about the types of resources that may be necessary and required. And they may need to shift depending upon what takes place in the landscape. I mean, just today we received the report out of the administration in terms of the challenges facing the state of California. We've got some concrete numbers now. So I think in the short term, the risks won't be going away. I venture to think they may escalate. So it may require a different pacing of reporting and talking with the board about these issues around risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. So with I know some people have to leave and we have action items. So I'm really trying to move us forward of you. And I apologize right now to David Lamoureux and his team and David, Nick, Mark, but we have the actuarial evaluation, item 8 is an action item, item 9, item 11, 12A, and 12B. So we need to get, it would be great to have at least a quorum before the end of the day. So, and again, those of you who need to leave it when you need to, but I would love to get these action items done if we can. So with that, hi, David. And I just want to do a time check. It's 3:26, and I know some people have to leave at like 3:45 and 4 o'clock. So with that, David, hi. Hi, Rick. Hi, Nick.
Hi. So we're here to, of course, talk about the 2019 valuation. However, the last couple of months have changed things so much. This is what we, just a little bit. This is what we propose that we'll do. We'll spend a very short time going over that. And then we also want to kind of update you on where we are based on what we've seen in the last couple of months. And then we want to leave time for questions and comments. So we're going to shorten our presentation by quite a bit. Before I turn it over to David and Mark and Nick, you know, this has happened a few times before where we've had sharp market declines. So this is nothing new for the fund. I remember back in 2001 after the dot-com bust, Mark Johnson and I were here and we advised the board to keep a steady hand, make some changes that are necessary, but not to panic, because this is a long-term fund. And we have long-term objectives, and we're still in good shape no matter what has happened the last couple of months. So I think we should keep that in mind. When these things happen, I always like to take a look at, and I'm looking at it now, if you look at TRV 57 in our actuarial report, what it shows is the long-term historical funded status. And it starts in 1975. And in 1975, we were somewhere in the 20%, 29% funded status. And if you go back before that, we were even worse off. So we've had very hard times before. The fund can withstand it if we are steady and take the long-term approach and don't panic. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And the last thing I wanted to point out was that in 2001, when we said the advice we gave in 2001 is still good in 2020, and another 20 years when another market decline occurs, I think the same advice would be good for whatever board is in place then. So with those comments, I'm going to turn it over. Mark and Nick are here to talk about the valuation, and David will lead the discussion on where we are currently based on a couple of months. So I'm going to turn it over to David now to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Rick. Nice to see everyone, not in person, but on the screen, better than nothing. So we're here to present the 19 valuation. It feels a little outdated, but just a few things I want to highlight is, so the valuation you have in front of you does reflect the supplemental payments we received from the state last summer. We received about $3.3 billion in supplemental contributions, which was one of the main reasons that led to the improvement in funding levels. The funded status went from 64 to 66% between 18 and 19. It also, the valuation is based on the newest assumptions that the board adopted last January. So all of this was built into the valuation. On this, I just wanted to highlight that every couple of years we hire an independent firm to review and replicate the work performed by Mark and Nick by Milken. And last year we hired a firm called Chiron to review their work. And I just want to highlight that between January and today, Chiron finished their review of the experience study and the assumptions that the board adopted last January. The report is now finalized. It's available on our website for the public to view. And Karen was able to replicate all of the results and the assumptions that Mark and Nick recommended to the board. And they said they were reasonable and they were in agreement with the proposed assumptions. So just want to highlight this. So what you have in front of you, going back to the valuation, this is an action item. So if you recall, the funding plan gave authority to the board to adjust contribution rates with certain limitations. So for the state, the board has already been able to exercise that authority for a few years. So this is one of the action items in front of you, is we are recommending an increase in the state contribution rate of 0.5%. So you can see what will be the impact of the recommendation. If you go to TRB 44, you can see a table that compares you the contribution rate that the state is paying this year and what we are recommending. And what the board has control over is the second line of that table, what we call the supplemental contribution rate for the state. It is currently 5.811%, and the funding plan limits annual increases by the board to 0.5% of payroll. So we are recommended that it be increased to 6.311% as shown in that table. And with that recommendation, the state would be contributing to CalSTRS a total of 10.828% for the year, 8.328% to the defined benefit program, and 2.5% to the what's called the SBMA, the Inflation Protection Program that we administer. So that would be what you're looking at. And the main thing I want to highlight here is if you ignore what's happening this year, we still have to remain on schedule with the funding plan. We are still looking at 2 more years of increases in the state contribution rate. So even with the increase today, we are still not where we would need to be for the state to eliminate their share of the unfunded liability that was in place last year as of 19. So just keep that in mind. We still have 2 more years of increases. And as Julie mentioned in her item, I know everyone is anxious right now about what's going on. What is that going to do to funding levels and contribution rates? It's still early to tell exactly. But if you remember our discussions we've had the last few years, especially in our risk report in November, how we've highlighted that most of the investment risk is borne by the state. What is likely going to come out, especially if we stay where we are, Chris Ailman mentioned this morning that looks like we're about flat right now. So if we do end the year with a 0% return, it could easily add another decade of necessary increases to the state contribution rate to be able to achieve full funding by the end of the funding plan by 2046. So just keep that in mind. And again, we stand ready to come to the board early in the fall once we know exactly where we finish the year so that we can update everyone on what it exactly means. But to end my comments, as we stated in the item, the main thing I want all of you to be aware, we are in a much better place today to withstand what's happening because of the funding plan, because of the fact it provides you as board member the authority to adjust contribution rates, even if it's limited, to react to these drops in the market. And even if our funding levels were to decline as a result of this, because of the funding plan, we would expect to make progress toward full funding. And the last thing I want to remind the board is on TRB 45, we list the employer contribution rate for the upcoming year. Those rates are set in statute. So it is currently, the employers are currently required to contribute 18.4% this upcoming fiscal year. So that's set in statute. And what I want to remind board members of, this is the last year that that rate is set in statute. When we come in front of you a year from now, not only are we going to be asking you to adopt the state contribution rate like we are doing this year, but we're also going to be asking you to adopt the employer contribution rate, which will be the first time in the history of CalSTRS that the board adopts the employer contribution rate. So that's a year from now. And then with this, the board, the employer contribution rate will be the first time in the history of CalSTRS that the board adopts the employer contribution rate. So that's a year from now. And then with this, the employer contribution rate will be the first time in the history of CalSTRS that the board adopts the employer contribution rate. So that's a year from now. And then with this, That ends my comments. I'll let, if Mark and Nick want to say anything, I'll let them jump in. And just so everyone knows, if you see Mark's video appearing and disappearing, Mark emailed me to let me know that his internet is going in and out too. So it looks like at the moment we only have Nick on the call. So Nick, if you want to make any comments.
Okay, well, I'll take over from Mark because he was going to have the comments. I mean, I think the story on the valuation, it really is kind of no news is good news, but obviously that news is out of date. So basically, there's nothing really too much to remark on the valuation. I just kind of reiterate what David said about, the funded plan is doing what it should do, but it's going to probably be taking some significant stresses. So we'll just have to monitor that closely. And really, the best time to address that is in the fall when we've the dust is kind of settled and we know what the June 30th, 2020 numbers are. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the board.
Great, thanks, Nick. And if Mark gets back on and has something he wants to add, we'll make sure we hear from him. So board, Gail.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rick and David and Mark. I think it's, your jobs are always hard, and especially during these unprecedented times. I am going to abstain from this vote, Madam Chair. I understand how hard everyone has worked, but I want to just give you a little bit of context. The state, as I hope you've all read by now, is anticipating significant economic impacts from the pandemic. And because we know that a recession is here, as we talked about in our investment time, and the significant decreases in state revenues, and the increase in caseloads for all of our safety net programs to take care of people who are really suffering right now, in addition to our frontline workers. We are evaluating multiple proposals to address the contribution increases for the state and employers, school employers. And so I wanted to make sure to have full transparency around what is going on at the Department of Finance and the incredibly difficult choices we're making when there's the number that was reported is $55 billion as a deficit. So I am abstaining. I completely understand where the board and why we have to do this today, but I do think the context is important in terms of with Madam Chair just participating in no surprises. So we look forward to continuing to work together and coming out of this as we always have before. And to Mr. Enos's point that we are continuing to work together on this, and there's a lot that goes on, and so we really do appreciate the work of CalSTRS and how devoted everyone is to really seeing us through this. So thank you for that, Madam Chair, and I won't take up any more of your time. When it comes to the vote, if you could just note my abstention, please.
Absolutely, we'll make sure that we do that. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? The recommendation is on TRB 46. And what our actuaries are asking is adopting that normal cost rate of 18.133% of payroll, and for the 2% of 62 members, and that increase at the state rate from 5.811% to that 6.311% of payroll. Any questions? Or I'd entertain a motion. This is an action item.
So moved.
Sorry, second.
Oh, that's right. We have to do a roll call. Sorry. So roll call vote. Thank you, Bill. So it's been moved and seconded. Jennifer, is it Jennifer? Yep. Can you do a roll call vote for us for this item?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Ms. Paquin?
Yes.
Mr. Yamanaka?
Aye.
Mr. Prezant?
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Aye.
Ms. Bradford?
Aye.
Mr. Keeley?
Aye.
Ms. Higa?
Aye.
Mr. Seha? I'm sorry, was that a yes or a no?
I still couldn't hear him. Do a thumbs up or a thumbs okay. Yeah, perfect.
Ms. Miller?
I'm abstaining, Jennifer. Thank you.
Chairperson Hendricks, would you care to vote?
Yes, I'll vote yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, David, Rick. Thanks to Nick and Mark. I think, Gail's points are a good one. I mean, we're facing unprecedented stress on our state budgets, and we recognize that. I think I just want to reiterate that, we as a board, our sole, commitment is the, financial health of our system and this pension and this, the funding plan that we put in place. And so we recognize there are some challenging conversations ahead, but I appreciate the partnership, and we'll work through this. California, we're a strong state, and we'll get through it. But I appreciate the perspectives shared by the board, and thank you for approving this. So you have your approval. Thank you, David, Rick, Nick.
Thank you.
And, Mark,
Thank you.
wherever he is.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
Thanks so much. Item number 9 is the emergency delegation procedures. Brian, can you take us through that real quick? Did we lose Brian?
No, just wrong button.
Oh, no worries. I gotcha.
I'm operationally challenged, so.
All right.
So this may seem a little bit like closing the barn door after the horse got out, but we did have some discussions about having to put into place contracts. And right now, the way the system works is the board has delegated to the CEO certain authority to approve contracts, the non-investment contracts, up to $1 million and up to $100,000 for sole source contracts. The board has retained the approval authority for contracts above those limits. In the case of a declared emergency, if we need to enter into a contract above those levels, we would have to bring back the board to get a majority vote. Given the difficulty of sort of use Chris's metaphor of turning that ship into the wind, we thought it was prudent to create an exception in the board policy manual, should we need it, for the chair and the vice chair to approve contracts above that limit, up to 10 million and $1 million, based upon the recommendation of the CEO. And then as a control, well, there are two controls. One, it's only in the case of a officially declared emergency. And two, those contracts, of course, would be transparent. They would follow all of the state procurement rules that are applicable, and then would be reported back to the board. So again, this is an emergency measure. We may not even need to use it at this point, but it does seem we faced 2 major emergencies in the last 2 years, and it seems like it would be a prudent provision to have in the governance manual. So that's why it's before you.
So, Gail, is that your hand up again? Okay, go ahead, Gail. Just want to make sure
Yeah, I'm just going to thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bartow. I am a little bit curious. I hear what you're saying. I mean, I just always want to be mindful about what we are and are not approving during emergency circumstances. So I'm a little bit, so there's nothing currently, Mr. Bartow, that you think we would have to, no contract we'd currently have to enter into that would use this approval?
No, and if there were, we would be presenting that as an item in your contract approval process, which is coming up in a couple of items.
Okay.
To give you an example, I think when Ashish Jain took over as the chief technology officer, one of the things he discovered, bringing his expertise, is that a lot of our servers were out of date, and we were going to potentially lose some of our services if we didn't update them immediately. And he estimated that amount at $5 million, which was within our technology budget. And so it was something that we had to approve immediately, which was in our budget, and it was not something that had to go before the board. But it's that type of emergency. Had we needed to put into place servers or additional purchases above $1 million for technology to move out of the building, it would have been very difficult for us to do that without violating the policy, which of course I would not let anybody do. So I thought this was a good stopgap measure, and hopefully we put enough controls in it to recognize that it'll be used very rarely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I guess I'm a little bit unclear on, so if how long, what would the waiting period be, just in terms of the criteria? I understand kind of the emergent criteria you've set forth, but I'm not clear on kind of, because so you're just saying if it happened to fall within the 6 weeks that the board isn't meeting and you needed to make a decision within that period of time?
Yes, that's correct. It would be between board meetings, and it could not be. We couldn't notice a special meeting, 10-day notice, but it was a decision made by the CEO to recommend this, and then it was a decision agreed or followed and made by the board chair and the vice chair, but only on the recommendation of CEO.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. I would just be, I think we can sometimes, folks, as contracts in times of crisis can be complicated. So I assume this would just be a very, very rare one-off event. So I would just note that, like, for example, if the return to work order were to come and we wouldn't enter into an emergency PPE contract or something like that. So I'm comfortable with the parameters, but I think we'd also want to be really mindful of what these contracts potentially look like. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Gail, and excuse my barking dog. It has begun. Bill, you're next, and then Harry, and then Karen. So Bill?
Brian, is it possible, and maybe this is already contemplated, to have review and approval by the General Counsel's office as well?
Oh, yes.
That's implicit in it, but I think it the more we make it apparent that this is not just, going to be three people, looking at it and saying, yeah, let's go. And I know that is not the case, but I do think that if we can make a record that this is going to be reviewed and approved by General Counsel's office, it gives us a little bit more comfort.
I appreciate you asking the question, and that was actually in my notes. It will follow our normal procurement process. It'll just be a little bit more rapid, and that involves review, fiscal review as well, budgetary review. It will involve legal review. It will adhere to the state contracting processes, the public contract code law. It will have our standard terms and conditions. So it is really just an emergency power if it's necessary for the organization to function. But it will have the same internal controls. The only thing that would be missing would be a full board presentation, which we've put into the policy would happen immediately after the fact at the next regularly scheduled meeting or the next meeting. So thank you for asking the question.
Harry.
So thanks, Brian. Same concerns that Gail and Bill raised. So my understanding is it would only be for contracts that needed approval between board meetings, that the CEO was recommending, and the chair and the vice chair, as well as your office, would review. And then the transparency, the reporting out would be at the next board meeting. At what point does the dollar amount, which is now up to 10 million, go back to the $1 million threshold?
Well, the concept is the threshold. The $10 million threshold is only in the case of a officially declared emergency. Otherwise, the normal this is an addition to the policy manual. So the normal policy remains in effect. That in ordinary course of business, the board approves any contract over $1 million and any sole source contract over $100,000. And as I sit here today, I don't see any contracts right now that we would need to invoke this emergency provision. But if we needed to create an emergency provision, we'd have to pull together the full board to vote on an emergency provision, which would then sort of defeat the purpose. So again, your normal policy will remain in effect. As a matter of fact, you're going to be looking at some contracts later in your agenda. So this is only in case of emergency break glass.
So, okay, so the emergency is one that's declared by the state?
Well, it's an officially declared emergency, and the reason it's broader than that is right now we have a national declaration of emergency. We have a state declaration of emergency. We have a Yolo County declaration of emergency. And I really don't know, but I'm gathering there's maybe a West Sacramento declaration of emergency. So, and I'm sorry we're in this situation, but it really is kind of difficult to nail down which one's going to be affect us at the time.
That's pretty broad use of the term of state of emergency.
Yeah, which is why I put in the phrase officially declared state of emergency. It has to be by an official, which would be the governor, the president, the mayor or city council, the county board of supervisors, whoever has that authority. I'm happy to, if there are any drafting considerations, I'm happy to make those.
Thanks, Brian.
Good, Harry. I've got a couple more, 3 more people in the queue, and I think we're going to try and move on to the next agendas. So, Karen?
Hi. So, thanks for all the clarifications. I just have one more. So, can you just clarify that it's for anything, any vendor, any item, anything, as long as it's between those dollar figures?
Other than investment contracts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and non-investment contracts. So it would be for equipment, for services. So anything that would normally fall within the CEO's and the board's power that's been delegated to the CEO under $1 million.
Okay. So anything.
Yeah.
Okay. Outside of investments. Okay. Thank you.
Matt?
Thank you, Sharon. Just 2 quick questions. I know this all comes try to expedite process of decision making, which I think is a good decision. But I assume just because of the nature of that, there's not really an opportunity for other board members, such as statewide elected officials, to weigh in or provide any opinion on such a contract, approving that sort of thing?
You'd have some Bagley Keene difficulties in trying to do that.
Okay, I assume that that could be a conflict, but I want to just, for clarification's sake, that that would sort of be an untenable thing to try to thread that needle if, for instance, a board member, had an opinion on a particular contract, even a hypothetical one I don't want to address. But lastly, I just really quickly, I guess, is there, and maybe it's not a feasible thing either, but if a contract, is approved under these circumstances, is it possible that it could be reported to the board prior to the board meeting as sort of a heads up this action was taken? Or is there an issue with that as well?
No, that's an excellent suggestion. I'm sorry. I'm glad you raised it. We will add that into our process to immediately notify the board. That's a great suggestion. Thanks.
That's a good suggestion.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's any issue with obviously notifying it at the next public board meeting. I just felt like for those that might get questions about such a thing, it might be good to just be aware.
That's good.
I was just going to say, Brian, it reminds me of the delegated authority we have about making a judgment on legislation, and we just did that in a particular piece of legislation that Harry and I kind of were delegated the authority to make a decision, and then we send a note out to the board notifying you guys of what we did. So I think that's a really good idea, Matt, and we could do that so that you can before the next board meeting. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem. Bill.
Yeah, just one quick comment. Brian, when you draft this resolution, I would like you to add all of the language that you've referred to in terms of the process that you normally go through, just so that it's clear that this is a rather robust review prior to the approval by a variety of different people at CalSTRS. And consistent with California contracting law as well.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I was just making a note. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian, did you I think that's all great input. So
this falls into lessons learned. We're just trying to find things that have happened that we said we could have done this better, and there could have been some technology expenditures we would have had to make within hours. So we're trying to just clean up stuff that we know could go wrong in the future. That's all.
Great.
So I will add that language as well as what Matt just pointed out too, that board members will be immediately notified.
Great, thanks, Brian. So this is an action item, and I would imagine we could do a roll call vote with the amendments added by board members, or as amended. Is that the right term?
Yeah.
Approve as amended. And
I'm sorry, I just wanted to move the item. Oops, sorry.
Oops, that's okay, go ahead.
I'm just moving the item as amended, Madam Chair.
Been moved. It's been seconded. All right, moved and seconded. So now we need to do a roll call vote, Jennifer.
Ms. Paquin?
Aye.
Mr. Yamanaka?
Aye.
Mr. Prezant?
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto? Ms. Bradford?
Aye.
Mr. Keeley?
Aye.
Ms. Higa?
Aye.
Mr. Seha?
Aye.
Ms. Miller?
Aye.
Chairperson Hendricks, would you care to vote?
Sure, we'll vote aye.
The motion passes.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. And Brian, if it's okay with you, can we skip to item number 11? Can we do 11, 12A, 12B, and then go back to 10? Is that okay, since that's an information item?
Yes, actually,
Okay.
thank you, because I don't want you to lose your quorum since.
Exactly. I'm focused on action. Woman of action.
Good.
So let's go ahead to item 11, Brian.
Because some of the board members will be abstaining from the vote. This really has to do with reimbursement for the services that educated board members provide to the board, and at the same time they are employed by an educational institution, by a county, by a employer that contributes to our system. And our statute, the way it's drafted, allows for reimbursement for the cost of an employer to hire a replacement for such a board member, an educator board member. And it doesn't really have any limitation on it. So conceivably, like statutes in other states, it could be 100% of the time. In 2006, the board adopted a policy that really set forth some percentages, some of which was tied into various levels of participation, such as being a chair of the board, the investment committee, or an individual committee. And over the years, we've seen a steady march and increase in percentage, because we've seen a steady march in the challenges and the amount of time that educator board members have to spend on board business, unfortunately away from the classrooms where they, I think, sometimes would prefer to be. And so the last time we visited this 2 years ago, we did extensive research on the amount of time and effort that educator board members were spending on board business, the stakeholder and interest group engagements, the educational requirements. They amounted, even in our survey, up to 80%. And in considering the revision to the policy, the board also decided to eliminate the distinctions among the various levels of committee chair, just recognizing that all educated board members are all in all the time. And it was up to 80%. And as you've witnessed the last couple of years, the engagement and the stress and the amount of work for educated board members has greatly increased, continues to increase. And certainly, as we've seen during this crisis, I mean, the board, educated board members, as many of you other board members, have been all in all the time. It's required a tremendous amount of effort to steer this ship. And it would not be fair to an employer if we would not be able to allow them to be reimbursed for 100% of that activity by hiring a replacement. So the proposal here is really twofold. One is to allow the reimbursement up to 100% for the board activities of the educator board members, and then also to approve that going forward. It used to be a two-step process, because you would do the education you would do the appointment to committees and elections in this meeting, and then you would adjust the reimbursement based upon those positions. Now, since 2 years ago you eliminated that tie, it really would be just approving the reimbursement rates going forward. So that's why it's split in two processes. One is to change the policy, and then the other is to approve the reimbursement amount going forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I went through that rather quickly, but I think it's a pretty good historical description in the write-up. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gail.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to move this item.
It's been moved.
I second it.
Karen seconded. Okay. Any discussion? And as I said, I will abstain. I think the electeds are abstaining from the vote. So Jennifer, if you want to take a roll call.
Sure. Ms. Paquin?
Aye.
Mr. Yamanaka?
Aye.
Mr. Prezant?
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Definitely aye.
Ms. Bradford, do you want to abstain as well?
Abstain.
Okay. Mr. Keeley?
Abstain.
Okay. Ms. Higa?
Aye.
Mr. Seha?
Aye.
And Ms. Miller?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that. And then let's do items 12A and B. Brian, are you doing that, Brian, with me? Speaking of contracts requiring approval?
No, but I can.
Well, what do we need to?
Hang on.
Yeah, they're just on consent, but if you need.
Oh, they're just on consent. So that just means.
If someone wants to pull it.
Does anybody want to pull 12A or 12B? Does anyone want to pull those items? Then we can approve those on consent, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let's do that then. We have to take a roll call vote for that, or?
Affirmation.
Oh, sorry, you guys. I'm not a Robert's rule. So how do I say it, Brian?
May I move items 12A and 12B on to consent, please?
Yes. And, but how do I say something for affirmation? I need the language. Lawyers, Brian, help me.
Without objection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without objection. Okay. So 12A and 12B, so we can go back to item 10. Brian, Fiduciary Counsel, and Betty's not here, but we just want to thank Betty and Bill for their work. I believe it was an 8-hour, 6-hour.
It was almost as long.
Zoom call, Bill?
It was almost as long as today, but at least we didn't have the anti-fossil fuel people.
Yeah, but we had lawyers.
Well, yeah.
So,
That's the Fiduciary Counsel. But take it away, Brian.
They talk just as much. We couldn't limit them to the 3 minutes, though.
And this is an information item. And Lynn, did you want to jump in before Brian?
Oh, sure. I just want, on behalf of Betty, she really appreciated the process and thought it was a great process. And she's pleased that now that we have a deep pool of firms to draw on with the necessary experience in both defined benefit pension funds and also ESG issues. So very pleased with the process.
Great. Yes, and please tell her thank you for all her work, and for you too, Lynn. We appreciate it. This is why we're a good board, teamwork. All right, Brian.
well, so Betty and Bill did a great job making the lawyers squirm, which I thought was great. We did have a number of interviews. We started out with 21, narrowed it down to 11. We ended up interviewing a number of firms, 2 in Sacramento and then 4 virtually. Both Bill and Betty were very prescient about the issues that you're going to be dealing with over the next few years. And I can tell you that the selection of these counsel was from various levels of or types of expertise that you may need to call on over the next few years. So it was a very good process. We had some very good candidates, and they made good presentations. Bill and Betty are really tough questioners, so you were well represented. No lightweights got through. So anyway, this is the result. We have good fee arrangements with these firms, and we will have them on contract for you to use. They will understand that they represent you. They will generally work through me, but they do represent you, and that's very clear. We'll continue to make that clear. That's really all I have. If there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Any questions from board members? Seeing none. Great, thank you. Thanks for that. I will just comment that's an end of a, we've had one fiduciary council for a very, very long time, and now we've changed to a pool model, which I appreciate our willingness to adapt to new. We have a different need at this point, so we're making changes. So I really appreciate that change for us. Okay, let's see. Look at us taking action here. I think we're at item 12. Items referred to committee for board decision. Do we have anything? I don't think so. Item 14, new business, review of information requests. Jennifer?
I did not have any.
See anything? And then we have the draft agenda for the next meeting. Jack?
Yeah, so the dates are July 6, 7, 8. And, I think we all recognize from today that it's at least 2 days, 2 of those 3 days, if not more. The items you see on this agenda, the first ones are ones we always do in July, which is the business plan, which we've already actually written that item for the most part, number 3, and then the committee work plans that you would do with your key people. Those evaluations were bumped from this meeting when we were trying to make this meeting kind of short. So there you go. It's possible some of these could be bumped also to September, so I'll work with Sharon and Harry on that, and then the rest are just standard items.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I will comment. We really thought we pared this agenda down, and so I think again, Harry and I will work with Jack for the July agenda. But I do encourage you, when Amy gives you that questionnaire after this meeting, to give any helpful feedback that you think. Do you like the idea of 2 hours over, each day for 3 days, or 3 hours for 2 days, or really open to whatever works best for the majority of the board in terms of your brain power and schedule and that kind of thing. So open to ideas. Harry?
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jack. I think Jack mentioned it. It's something that we'll work on in the weeks ahead, and it'll probably come back in some format. It's a draft agenda for July, and we'll reflect on what went well today and what's absolutely necessary for the next meeting, what doesn't need to be on the agenda, and the formatting of it. So we'll work on it together and bring it back, most likely virtual as well.
Yeah, good. And Joy, did you have your hand up? Okay, all right. I don't see any other hands, so okay. And our last item is opportunities for statements for the public. And I think Brian let me know that there's one person wanting to speak. So Brian, can you? I hear connection happening.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing in these really trying times. My name is Mark Guthrie. I'm a 6th grade teacher. I'm a member of CalSTRS, so I really appreciate all your hard work stewarding our retirement funds. I'm calling because I really want CalSTRS to divest from fossil fuels. In the past 3 school years, the 6th grade students at my school, while our whole school has been closed for 15 days due to 4 different climate-related disasters: the Tubbs Fire, the Russian River flooding, the Paradise Fire, and then most recently the Kincaid Fire. And as a 6th grade teacher, I stand right at the interface of the generations, and I'm charged with teaching objective climate science, and many adult scientists experience trauma symptoms just sitting with and listening to the objective, detached reality of the situation. And I read the notes from your October 2019 offsite meeting, and I really appreciate that you're trying to mitigate risks and there's tons of uncertainty. But nowhere in those notes and nowhere in the CalSTRS statement about sustainable investment did I see any mention of things that I know are certain. The fossil fuel industry is responsible not just for fossil fuel pollution and driving this climate crisis, but that has imprinted on the neuropsychology of our children. And I see it in the 6th grade classroom in a way that I think a lot of people can't see. When I teach them objective climate science, everything that we've taught them about healthy learning communities, about the core foundational beliefs and values that make our schools healthy places, that is absolutely all thrown under the bus, and it is clearly generational neglect. And I know that you have a policy of sustainable investment, and I appreciate the intent behind that. But the fossil fuel industry is clearly not capable of acting in the best interests of our children. And so you can draw a bright line in the sand. And I just encourage you to kind of zoom out a little bit and think about drawing this bright line in the sand for our children. No one should be treating them this way. And by divesting from fossil fuels, you can send a very, very clear message. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate all your hard work.
Thanks for what you do as a teacher.
Great. Okay, Brian, do we have that? Okay, great. And with that, I believe we are adjourned. We have adjourned our first virtual CalSTRS board.
Hey, we did it.
We did it.
And I do.
Nice to see everyone.
Special shout out to our teachers in the audience, our CalSTRS members in the audience who have adapted to online learning, and all the parents who are homeschooling. Yes. I'm looking at you, Gail, and all the moms, Joy, on our board. So I'm just
all the parents that have learned that should be getting paid like $1 billion a year. That's my takeaway from homeschooling.
I think a lot of people are saying that teachers
deserve
a lot more.
Well, I'm so grateful to everything each of you do every day, and like how you've transitioned to this world, especially supporting our children who really need their teachers in ways that I think, seeing how much you bring to them every day has been difficult and incredibly eye-opening, and just filled me with gratitude. So thank you very much.
Thank you, California teachers. It is Teacher Appreciation Week. So
thank you, California teachers.
Thank you.
We're very grateful.
We'll see you next time.
Good to see you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Chris.